morning, colleagues. Sorry for starting late. I think we can now start. My name is Mabafukeng Hoyane. I'm a researcher here at Chief Albert Luthuli Research Chair. And thank you so much, Mafrika Matle, for coming through. And thank you so much to our participants. And with all protocol observed, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to call up Prof to do an opening remarks for us. Prof, can you come through? Thank you.
Dumelang. Good morning, colleagues. It's so early in the morning, and I hope that it's going to get livelier by the day. Ke kopa le tsoheng hlaba haeso le kae? Re teng, enwa ke Puleng, ke moradi wa sekgalo, motshweneng, mohurutsi. Thoko tsa heso nna ke ja ditholwana. Ke motshweneng wa ha Khiba, ke lemele le tshoko koma ditlhare. I'm so happy to be here this morning, colleagues, with you all. I'm so happy to see all of you. I wish I could just continue in Sesotho. I dream of a day when I can just come and stand here, ebe ke bua puo ya heso, ka boikgantsho, ka boqhetseke. Hoba tsena tsohle ka sekgowa ke kgone ho di etsa. Empa he re mona. That is exactly why we're having this conversation, to grapple with this issue, to be in conversation, to reflect, and to look for ways in which we can get to a point where it is possible for me to just come and stand here. And we have our conversations in our African languages. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this symposium, the Chief Albert Luthuli Research Chair Symposium, with a focus on African languages. Each and every year, the chair hosts an annual lecture. And all these lectures have got very specific themes that are aligned to what Albert Luthuli stood for and what he fought for. So last year, we hosted the lecture under the theme Reclaiming African Languages, Identity, Knowledge, and Educational Transformation. And as you know, with lectures, you always have a keynote speaker who would come and speak and share with us very important points that after the lecture we sit with, we grapple with. So what we decided to do as the chair was to have a follow-up engagement in the form of a symposium such as this one, where we come together to further unpack the themes that would have come up at the annual lecture. And so this is also what we are doing today. We do this also in the month of Africa, a month where we reflect as African people, a month where we again engage with issues of what it means to be an African and the work that needs to happen for us to reclaim so many things that have been taken away from us. Through this lecture that we hosted last year, we found ourselves deeply reflecting on the enduring legacy of Ubaba Inkosi Albert Luthuli, who was a pivotal figure in the struggle for equality and the affirmation of African identity. Luthuli's life illustrates that language transcends mere communication. It is a profound embodiment of our cultural heritage, historical narratives, and collective identity. African languages have remained marginalized throughout history, primarily due to the imposition of European languages by the colonial powers as dominant tools for governance, education, and social advancement. This imposition extended beyond just mere communication. It constituted a form of epistemic violence that devalued African intellectual systems and worldviews. The marginalization of African languages in South Africa in particular, in our education system, is a direct legacy of colonial and apartheid-era language policies which prioritized English and Afrikaans while devaluing indigenous linguistic heritage. In this democratic era, the constitution of our republic recognized 11 official languages. And we know that progress has been uneven. This year, we commemorate the 30 years of our Constitution, and it is an opportune time for us to reflect together on the promises made and what we have managed to achieve thus far and the work that still lies ahead. African languages were important to Nkosi Albert Luthuli, and in 1953, he established the isiZulu Language and Cultural Society. He understood the role that language plays in who we are as a people. In her keynote address at the lecture, Ambassador Thenjiwe Mtintso reminded us that reclaiming African languages is not a cultural afterthought. She argued that it is a nation-building strategy. It strengthens identity, it deepens learning, it broadens participation, and it multiplies pathways to excellence. She further challenged us, academics in particular, and institutions of higher learning, to walk the talk. But to move beyond theorizing and to reimagine the curriculum and to be bold in our reclaiming and recentering of African languages in our teaching, our research, and facilitation of learning. Professor Kwesi Pra asserts that no society has ever developed on the basis of a borrowed language. His argument, I believe, is a sober reminder that linguistic dependency translates to intellectual dependency. When the languages of scholarship, of technology, and of policy remain colonial, knowledge itself becomes a foreign import. Yesterday, I attended the opening of our Research and Innovation Week. We are in the midst of the Research and Innovation Week here at Unisa, where the focus was on generative AI. A critical point was raised by the keynote speaker on how, in the age of AI, what we have available determines what we consume. How many of us are in social media there? We always say they listen to us. And he shared with us that at the moment there is only just over 11,000 articles in isiZulu. And there is only over 900 in Sesotho. And he was making this point to say that if we don't publish in our languages, then there is nothing feeding the generative AI. I found this aligning perfectly with Prof. Pra's assertion that no society has ever developed on the basis of a borrowed language. So when you go on Google, when you go on your chatbots, when you go online just generally and looking for information, it's going to feed you back what it has been fed. And the challenge that was being put to us was, what are we contributing? How are we contributing to the knowledge production in this technological era? And this is the challenge that I would also like to put to us today, ladies and gentlemen. That as we rethink the role of African languages in all these different spheres of our lives, what contributions are we making? I'm very delighted that We have our colleague from the publishing press, because it's not also about producing the knowledge, right? It's also about the spaces that we are afforded to be able to publish the work. Because some of the arguments are always, but where am I going to publish the work? Who's going to read my work? And I think that argument sometimes is the one that limits us in terms of the work that we need to do. With these few words, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to once again welcome all of you. I would like to also just acknowledge Professor Siyasanga Jali from the college management. Thank you so much, Prof, for being here today. And all of you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking your time to being here with us today. And I look forward to very fruitful engagements and reflections. And I would like to acknowledge again and thank all our speakers for being here today to come and reflect with us and to share your knowledge and to share your insights. We are very much looking forward to what you have in store for us. Ke a leboha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Am I audible? All right. So our next item on the agenda is going to be a follow-up. I'm also going to do a bit of a reflection on last year's annual lecture from my perspective. So, dear colleagues, scholars, students, language practitioners, community members who have gathered here today in the spirit of our last year's distinguished keynote speaker, Umamu Tenjiwe Mtiso. Dumelang, Sanbonani, Molweni, good morning. I want to begin with an argument. I want to begin not with an argument, but with a question, a quiet one. When you dream, what language do you dream in? When you grieve, when you pray, when you reach for the right words to describe something that has not translation, which language reaches back? For many of us in this room, that language is not English, yet here we are in a university in the year 2026, still having to make the case that the language in which we dream belongs in the academy. That is the provocation that Umam Mtiso placed before us in the annual Founders Lecture. And that is the conversation this symposium exists to continue. Umam Mtiso's lecture did not merely survey the problem of African languages, African language marginalization. It named it for what it is, as Prof just mentioned, a form of epistemic violence. Not inconvenient, not oversight, but violence. The colonial imposition of European languages was never simply about communication. It was about dismantling, systematically and deliberately, the intellectual frameworks, the worldviews, the very cognitive architectures through which African people understood themselves in the world. Ngugiwa Tiongo wrote about this in 1986. Bangu Mose wrote about it. Prague, like Prof just mentioned, wrote about it. And Ambassador Mtiso reminded us last year that we're still living inside the consequences. What I want to add to that, what my own reflection brings to this conversation, is this. The violence did not end with independence. It was inherited. Many post-African governments, including our own, in various ways adopted colonial languages as the medium of governance and education. The structure remained. Only the faces at the top changed. That is a painful thing to say, but this symposium is not a place for comfort, half-truth. It is a place for rigorous honesty in the service of transformation. I want to speak for a moment, not about what has been taken, but about what remains, about what African languages actually are and do. They are not simply codes for exchanging information, they are living archives. They carry with them the philosophies of our ancestors, the cosmologies through which our communities make sense of the world, the spiritual knowledge that binds the living to the dead, the ecological wisdom accumulated over generations of intimate relationship with specific landscapes and seasons. Through our mother tongues, we articulate our connection to the land, to the ancestors, to ritual, to the divine. Through our mother tongue, stories are told in ways that cannot be replicated in translation. It's Xhosa's dialogue, we all know that. Ceremonies are performed. Children learn not just facts, but ways of being. When these languages are absent from formal institutions, when they're confined to the home, to the village, to the informal spaces of life, what is lost is not merely a way of saying things. What is lost are the things themselves. Entire philosophical traditions, entire ethnological frameworks, gone or going, not because they're not worthy, but because we have not yet built the institution structures to hold them. As Prof said, South Africa made a promise in 1996. Our constitution recognized 11 official languages and committed this country to a linguistic equity. The language policy for higher education in 2002 reinforced that commitment, calling on our universities to develop African languages as mediums of instruction, research, and academic discourse. 20-some years later, we're still here, at a symposium, still making the case. Now I want to be fair. Institutions like Unisa have made efforts. African language courses exist. Translation services operate. Terminological development projects are underway. These are real contributions, and real people have given real energy to them. But, and this is the honest part, this effort remain peripheral. They exist at the margins of the curriculum, not at its center. English continues to dominate teaching, learning, and assessment, not because the policy permits it uncritically, but because institutional culture, resources allocation, and years of accumulated inertia make it the default, the path of least resistance, the unmarked norm. And the cost of that default is borne disproportionately by students whom English is a second or third language. Students who arrive at the university intellectually capable and academically ready, but who must first cross a linguistic barrier before they can even begin to show what they know. This is not a neutral situation. This is a structural injustice. So what does transformation actually require? It requires us to understand that this is not a question for linguistic departments alone. The integration of African languages into the curriculum is a question for law faculties, for science departments, for schools of education, health sciences, and social work. It is a question for every site in this university where knowledge is produced, taught, and assessed. It requires us to move beyond translation, which often still privileges English as the source, toward general multilingual pedagogy, toward a curricula that allow African epistemologies, philosophies, and ways of knowing to be expressed in their own terms, not rendered into European equivalents. It requires, as Mosakwe Veil has argued, that we treat the incorporation of African language not as an act of cultural charity, but as a condition of genuine epistemic access, as the basis upon which students can engage fully, critically, and creatively with the academic content. And it requires us most fundamentally institutional will, not just policy, not just symposia, the will. The willingness to make decisions about curriculum, about resources, about assessments, about hiring, the actual shift of balance. So in closing, I started this morning with a question about dreams. I want to close with a commitment. The work of this symposium, the panels you will hear today, the conversations we'll have, the action framework we are beginning to co-produce, is the work of insisting that language of dreams, of prayer, of grief, of philosophy, of story belongs here. Not as a relic to be preserved behind glass, not as a symbol of cultural pride to be invoked at graduation ceremonies and ignored in the lecture halls, but as living, breathing, generative force at the very center of what the university does or who it serves. Ambassador Mtinso's lecture was a call. The symposium is our answer, and the answer is yes. Yes, we'll do the work. Yes, we'll hold the institution accountable to its own promise. Yes, we believe that African languages belong fully and unapologetically at the heart of higher education. Ke a leboga, ke a bonga. Thank you, Mama Queen. Hey. So now, I'm going to move to the third agenda, right before we go in deep, to have the accountability I was just talking about in terms of here at home at Unisa Press, what are we doing to ensure the longevity of African languages? And in that, I want to introduce Mrs. Patterson, who is a commissioning editor and manager at Unisa Press. She has completed an MA in Information Science at Unisa and is currently enrolled for her PhD at UP. She's an editorial board member of NAMFAS, Academic Nonfiction Authors Association of South Africa. She holds an honors degree in English, a teaching degree from UP, fine arts diploma at UJ, 2 marketing diplomas at Unisa International Marketing and the Basics of Business. She has delivered published conference papers, have co-authored and authored articles and book chapters. She practices in fine arts as a printmaker of monographs and artistic books. She's involved in the Mood Community Cleanup Project series, where she regularly helps to design and paint large murals on bridges and walls in the Pretoria Mood region. Apart from assisting with the general cleaning up action, she currently is painting a bridge which is 45 meters wide. Look for it on CR Swat Drive on your way to Hardy Muller Traffic Circle in the Waverley, Pretoria. And with that, colleagues, can we please give a warm welcome to Mrs. Peters? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. You must just check that my voice is audible at the back there. And apologies for being late. I was not still painting that bridge, but I can tell you that bridge is now completed. The 45 meter is a very nice bridge to drive past. And the thought behind it is to look after your community, to clean up, to make it look nice. It's actually to prevent crime. Nobody gets paid to do this. The community gathers money for the paint and so on. Let's see if we can take that spirit into multilingualism or into my talk, where I'm going to talk to you about publishing in African languages, challenges and opportunities. And I will, as I continue, also comment on the speakers, where I was provoked, because as I was driving here, I was also thinking about the aspect of, in what language do you dream? It's very true. I'm Afrikaans speaking. We work in a different language. And what does it do to you? And when my talk closes, we will look at Ngugi wa Thiong'o and what he says about language and the value of the mother tongue. And also the aspect of AI, I will get to that in between, where it's very true what we feed into it. If we don't feed things in there, we're never going to grow the body of African language. So I see some opportunities and just as much as there are threats. So I'll just weave that into the talk. I read on a website, if we consider that 91% of South Africa speak a language other than English at home, consider that. And the website who says this is Mother Tongue Media. This is an advertising company that actually makes a living by translating any advertising text into an indigenous language, because they've realized this is a super target market. So there's a Nedbank advert, go have a look. So what does it tell us? We should value this language that we speak at home, and not forget about it when we're in an academic space, we're part of the Research and Innovation Week, but let's talk about the possible opportunities. So multilingualism is seen as a reality in South Africa, and it's generally recognized that knowing more languages opens up more opportunities. And the person who says this is, I'm going to struggle to say this guy's surname, Mbirimi Hungwi. In 2024, he wrote an article that debunks the idea that at one stage there was a fear of multilingualism, that one language may interfere with the knowledge of another. So after the talk, I'll give you my bibliography that you can look at the articles I read. So the idea is to say, what he says in the article, he spoke to students, and the idea is people are beginning to realize the more languages you know, of course, the more opportunity. Oh, you know. Okay, thank you. I think I'm too tall for that one or something. So that's the idea. The more languages you know, the more opportunity. And the younger you actually learn languages, you are not going to get confused. You can handle the different systems, but each language has its own beauty, of course. So in terms of opportunities, I want to bring to you immediately a tangible opportunity that UNFASA, the Academic and Non-Fiction Authors Association of South Africa, is currently running their annual drive to boost indigenous language publishing. That's not just talk. They have combined with the DSAC, Department of Science, Arts and Culture. They've been doing this for 5 odd years, and the result has been more than 50 books have been published in this Publishing Hub initiative. So once you apply for UNFASA membership, you can enter your work of fiction or non-fiction online at the website, and you will get the address from me. It's basically on the UNFASA website, and this is to foster more new native voices. So for the past years, UNFASA has been working with the Department of Science, Arts and Culture, as said, and the competition is not just a competition. It also draws in smaller publishers, because otherwise the big ones only benefit the smaller publishers and the new authors, and there's a focus on underrepresented groups such as women, the youth, and special efforts are also made to convert books into sign language and Braille, also official languages of this country, not to be overlooked. And the idea is then to reach, of course, the visually impaired or the visually disabled. Although it's a small part of the population, it's a minority group, and their needs are also important. So, as I've said, there's 57 books, 43 physical books, 8 audio books, 6 books converted to Braille, and even 4 Khoi and San books were written in Kwedam, Tali, and Nama were published to further emphasize the importance of linguistic and cultural preservation. So please, the closing date is June. If you know of anybody interested to participate, give yourself this opportunity. Even a small publisher can enroll, and you can help get words out there. So if you look at the South African landscape, there are publishers who specialize in African language publishing, but because it's such a niche, most publishers those that are available to publish languages, would go across the whole board. So there are even large educational publishing publishers specializing in contents for schools only. This is what I often emphasize when people approach me for advice about publishing. You must always try and match your manuscript to the publisher you're approaching. This gives you a better chance of success. I've also found there's a new readers publishing. This is a publishing house that's an NGO, and they specialize in adult literacy. This is also now a new category, and the books are even available online for free. So the opportunity is to really support fellow speakers of the language, to stimulate and use, and I think later on when we speak about the potential of AI also, I would say there's major opportunities. Many of us speak the language at home, but we might not write it so fluently. The potential with AI, there is at the moment, there is software that's developed that spoken language can be translated into written and the other way around. Of course, it will be flawed, it will need the human intervention, but there's a big potential then to create on-the-fly forms of the language. So there's software developed by ReadSpeak with the CSIR that you can, it's the other way around. You have the written or the electronic text available in all South Africa's languages. I'm not sure about sign language, but at least all the indigenous languages can be on the fly translated into audio. So the power of that is for people that are slightly reading disabled and prefer to listen to text, or if you're working at home, you're doing something and you just want to read or listen to some text, you're driving, you can't read, you can tap into audiobooks. So the aspect of audio, I think, is a huge potential that we haven't really tapped into. Even at Unisa, we've got sound studios. How come we don't record more? Why don't we go back and record more texts? You know, why don't we make sure that texts are more available in more format? And audio is also an important format. It's extremely accessible to people who are sometimes resistant to reading. So if you can just park that thought for a big potential for AI. There is a lot of concern that the reading market for African language just is becoming smaller. And yet there are signs that it will grow again. So it might go through some dips where mother tongue education, the importance of this is again being brought to the fore. And a major effort is being undertaken by at least several companies to build vocabulary of subject terminology so that African languages can also be used for academic study. There mustn't be the barrier, such as for mathematics. The language, the terminology must be there, but specifically I think it's important for South Africa, where there's a lot of language variation, that instead of fighting about spelling variations, I found that among African language speakers, I've even approached as a publisher somebody to give me an opinion about a manuscript. The person got so upset because there's so many variations in the spelling. The person couldn't bring himself to judge the text because he was caught up in the surface of the language variation. Oh, how can they spell like this? Is horrible. So I said, please don't edit the text. Tell me the merit. Can you see we should get over it? Where Afrikaans, even the purists now, we know there's hip-hop Afrikaans, there's streek Afrikaans, there's Kaaps Afrikaans, you know. Just write it down, capture it, and, you know, don't fight about it. There is another opportunity for AI. Any of you can do a study, go into a language, map, and respect the variations. Go to the regions and find them all out and treat it as a serious topic of study. If you don't map it, it's not there. It's not in the AI if it's not mapped. And where are our variations? It's actually the beauty of an alive language that there is variation. So that's why I say, okay, definitely more opportunities. So it seems that we've got a speaking culture, a lot of oral literature. We love speaking. Look at all our radio stations. But can't we take the radio stations now and take it into, you know, written text? That thing of building book clubs. There's some book clubs. I know Afrikaners love their book clubs. I found in Polokwane, we visited some fairs there, very good entrepreneurial spirit there among the small book clubs. They offer also to advertise other authors' books, young and small authors. So these book clubs can be quite entrepreneurial to foster a culture of reading. I hear that in March 2026, a language summit was held in Cape Town, and unfortunately, the outcome was that it was said that multilingualism remains an aspirational ideal rather than a resourced and enforced priority in terms of government expenditure. And it was said that 73% of state departments do not have budgets for the implementation of multilingualism. Yeah, so that's bad, eh? So the use of Official Languages Act of 2012, I didn't know this act existed. Therefore, how will they implement this act if there's no money put into it? So there's also been established the South African Centre for Digital Language Resources. I think this is what I'm talking about in terms of adding some meat to African languages, making sure it is captured inside AI. And this is then all of our tasks to start writing down all the variations you hear around you, maybe pass it on to a dictionary maker. But I must say for myself, as an Afrikaans-speaking person, language, in terms of its expressive value, if you look at, or just listen to the different sounds, there's such poetry in the texture of language. The rhythms, you should just hear it. You should listen to it and understand that some poetry cannot be translated. So this is why when you want to write poetry, or maybe a short story, or maybe something expressive that happened, something you heard at home. Come on, some things can't be translated. At the moment, whenever I'm in a group of people and they jump into an African language, I would tell them, give me subtitles, I want some subtitles. Because I also want to share what they're saying. But I also don't want to interrupt the flow of how well they're expressing themselves. You know, there is a beauty in how people can express them in their mother tongue. And apparently the Smithsonian Institute in New York has an annual Mother Tongue Media Festival, during which they also host a film festival to celebrate diverse languages and cultures. Okay, so we have to come to the section on what are the big challenges for income generations for authors and for publishers. So we're saying that when you look at surveys and so on, the challenge to publish in African languages are often to find sizable reading audience in some markets. I must say, I myself took the plays of Zakes Mda to KwaZulu-Natal audiences, and the exclusive books wouldn't take it. They said to me, it's not going to sell. So how can that be? How can that be? That shouldn't be. So the cultural legacy of many indigenous African communities, it is said, is under threat. Now, that is something that we should look at, and in the conclusion made by a certain Motsabe, following the observation that publishers face shrinking reading markets with the publishing of indigenous language books, we will need to have a look at that. It is a reality on the ground. I also have to remind you of, if you look at the website of the Publishers Association of South Africa, PASA, they annually gather information about trade and academic books and what's the income. And in terms of the reality of a people speaking but not reading or writing enough, the language, what we see there, the story is not good, the picture is not good to hear about. For trade books, so you can define trade books as a general interest books and also includes adult and children's fiction and non-fiction books. This 2023-2024, the latest trade income statistics on the site of PASA says that unfortunately for African languages, only 3% of the books are written in African languages, compared to 78% in English and 19% Afrikaans. So if they go into a breakdown by language for the same year, the spread of income by language is reflected as follows: 25% for Sepedi, 19% is Ndebele, 15% is Zulu, 12% for Sesotho, 6% for multilingual books, and unfortunately nothing was seen for Seswati and Setsonga, which is disconcerting, you know. And when it comes to academic books, those are textbooks and books published for university students, as well as books for continuous professional development. Which sector is seen as being generally in decline due to various factors, such as a lack of ring-fenced NSFAS funding. You know that at one stage there was funding for books only, and it's not the case anymore. So what we are finding is that the academic book sector is seen as being heavily dominated by the production of English language text, 99% of all revenue, which is explained by the perception of English as the language of academia and university education. So it's up to us, each of you, to change that, and maybe next time you publish in a journal, why don't you ask, or why don't you offer to translate at least the abstract of your article in the language of your choice? Shouldn't all South African journals, you know, shouldn't we make this statement? Although it's a little bit of extra trouble, but shouldn't we say, let's at least write the abstract, can be in English of course, but in some more African languages. We begin the tradition, you know, we also, you know, it's possible, we know it's possible. Why this single domination of English, you know? So the PASA survey also includes an analysis of small and micro enterprises, those are the small publishers. And why I raise this is because this is an increasing industry trend, that there are smaller businesses. As you find all around, South Africans are quite entrepreneurial, and this is possibly also an opportunity. You know, when at the PASA there's even a special committee looking after the interest of SMMEs, because these guys are struggling, but they're so entrepreneurial. So when it comes to African languages publishing, the smaller publishers indicated that they were publishing in African languages, and the spread, I'm just going to give you a rough idea of the spread, but many of them publish in more than one language. So for Afrikaans it's 19, English 33, isiNdebele 6, isiZulu 15, isiXhosa 16, Sepedi 7, Sesotho 10, Setswana 8, Siswati 6, Tshivenda 5, Setsonga 4, and other languages 10. So one could say the description, how we would describe the small publishers is, it is a small group of often only 1 to 4 staff members based in mainly Gauteng or the Western Cape, and some of them only publish 10 books a year, mostly in trade fiction and mostly in English. By the way, in the Department of English, right here at Unisa, there's a guy I'm even trying to bring to Unisa Press. His name is Sydney Maluleke. He's himself a small publisher, Maluk's Books, and he's even won some awards. So look out, you never know, the next person you're sitting next to might be a budding publisher. So some of these small publishers, they have a turnover of less than 5 million a year, or often closer to only 1 million, and they don't always turn a profit every year. And they regularly rely on personal savings rather than formal bank funding. They tend to distribute their books through direct sales or independent booksellers. In spite of many challenges, they're persistent. Most have been active for more than 7 years. Via Anfasa, I got to know about another entrepreneurial retired English-speaking white couple who started also to push in almost spaza shops of small publishers inside libraries. Very interesting. The idea is, with business, if you're struggling, be as flexible as possible on the ground. How this is linked to African languages is they set themselves up inside libraries and offer to publish for people. And they also try and teach them to improve their standards and so on, because the hassle with smaller publishers is sometimes the standards suffer. And of course you want the standards to be as high as possible. So in line with the trend for smaller publishers, Mujaji Books, themselves a smaller local publishing, they only publish female books, and they've annually begun to publish a booklet to list and help spread the word about these brave independent publishers from across Africa, not just South Africa. So look out on the website of Mujaji Books, their annual list of small publishers across Africa. A very interesting trend to look out for, not always to go to the bigger publisher. Apart from, there's a trend also for self-publishing. But as a publisher, the only a quick aside I can say about that is watch out if you publish by yourself for quality assurance. Get it checked extremely carefully, and watch out for the phase after you've published it, how to market it. It's quite tricky if you don't have a distribution network. But there are ways to do that with, there are distributors that you can appoint to help you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to get to the highlight for me, is the words of the late Kenyan author Ngugi wa Thiong'o, himself an author who also firstly published in English and then moved into his mother tongue. He made a couple of beautiful quotes about language, definitely felt very strongly about it. He said that, if you know all the languages of the world, but not your mother tongue, that is enslavement. Knowing your mother tongue and all other languages too is empowerment. So I read this on the website of This Is Africa. So in line with the Africa Day celebrations just within this week and starting yesterday, perhaps we should take a closer look at other quotes from the same author. So he began, as I say, he switched to Gikuyu, and he wrote novels, plays, short stories, and essays. So apart from this well-known quote I just read, I'm just going to read some three more to you. He says, use English, but don't let English use you. African languages are not on a lower rung on a ladder to an English heaven. And in the colonial conquest, language did to the mind what the sword did to the bodies of the colonized. And more critically then, in an earlier quote, he said that language as a culture is the collective memory bank of a people's experience in history. So this came from his Decolonizing the Mind, the politics of language in African literature. And that was quoted in part 1 of This Is Africa website. They have a part 1 and a part 2. I also came across the words of Unisa professor in information science, Professor Patrick Ngulubi, in 2012, who wrote, he gave the perspective that, okay, so publishers might struggle to make money, but they should look at a wider goal. We are part of a scholarly institution. We do get subsidized quite a lot. So what is the story? So his advice is, publishing is a business concern and publishers must remain viable, but it is our argument that first and foremost, publishing should serve a cultural, intellectual, and social purpose rather than a commercial purpose per se. So this is an author's perspective. He himself is also an author, of course. And I would just recommend to all of you to speak your truth and stand in your truth. And then as a closing, let's say a small advert to Unisa Press, who is turning 70 this year. I'm just going to mention a few books that we did publish in African languages. And of course, we are still open to publishing books in African languages, although not creative writing, which is a sadness. Maybe that will change, or maybe that can still change. So we've published the plays of Zakes Mda in all the official languages except Swahili. He gave us the rights and he even asked us, where's the Swahili? We still can do that. We've published many of the local authors, but I think there's a gap. We haven't published in Swati. We've published some Venda books, even about the Lemba. We've published novels and short stories. I oversee a book about the Kgorong language. This is an almost extinct language with ties to Afrikaans. The book was published in English, ironically, and the book actually won a Hidden Curry Award at Unisa Press. And the strange thing is now it's being translated into Afrikaans. We have published Afrikaans and English back-to-back Bushman stories of Vetkat Kruiper, and I forgot his whole long name. And Belinda Kruiper is also in the book. There's Water Stories, which is also back-to-back Afrikaans English. We've got a translation of Shaka in Afrikaans, even with an audio book read by Antjie Krog. We've got Imibono Yetu, which is Zulu, and Xhosa short stories back-to-back by Rosalie Finlayson. Then David Rusenga gave us Sweet Tenyekile, and I can go on. So I'm saying that Unisa Press, the doors are open. We can publish your book in African languages. On a personal note, I would say maybe try and set a goal for yourself. Every English article or item that you publish, can't you do a parallel article in your mother tongue? Take that as a challenge for the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Peters. Can we please give her a round of applause again? Thank you for the insightfulness, right? In terms of the AI and call for action. I like that it's an intergenerational group, so that we have to feed. For the first time in our lifetime, we get to choose how to be involved on the world platform. No language, new AI. We are responsible for feeding our own AI. So I'm really excited about that. I hope you answer questions like, why is it hard to publish in terms of access and the pricing? Because I know personally, it's usually the pricing, how much books cost now, right? How can we subsidize that to make it easier for people to have access, even for the authors, whether they're self-publishing or not? How can we have access? So maybe you can speak to that once we have the question and answer session. But sit there, from one publisher to another. Super excited for this. Since Vangi, please come on podium as I read your short biography. So, Vangi Legajo is a poet, healer, teaching artist, and co-founder of Mpepo Press. She is the current editor of New Coin Poetry Journal and the author of poetry collection Red Cotton, which was published in 2018. I think Gena, because you know it's long. So she has published poetry collection titled Red Cotton in 2018 and Undressing in Front of the Window 2015. She holds an MA in creative writing from the university currently known as Rhodes, and has taught at several tertiary institutions in South Africa and the US. Her work appears in various publications, including Small-Fisted Poems forthcoming, The Creative Arts on Practice, Making, and Meaning, which was published in 2024, Wild Imperfections, and Anthology of Womanist Poems, which was published in 2021. New Daughters of Africa, published in 2019, The Atlanta Review in 2018, and Illumination in 2017. Kgorong has performed her work in 3 continents and curated and co-curated literary events across the globe, both in person and online. She is dedicated to initiatives that encourage Black feminine visibility and healing, such as Ogu Pula, a creative writing resistant to gender-based violence, and Small Girl Rising, connecting the divine, Black feminine, and international poetry healing initiative. And she will be speaking today on language, identity, and asthmatic justice. Can we please give her a round of applause? Susvi.
Diabulela kakhulu. Molweni. Ninjani. Siphilile nathi Nkosi. I say this to say that I observe all protocols, and I observe all protocols, fully aware of my rebellious nature, but here we are. So as a storyteller, as a healer, and as an aspiring publisher, I am interested in the stories of people. I am interested in who tells our stories, how our stories are documented, and I have a vested interest in the effects that these stories, the effects of the stories we do and do not know have on us, particularly as Black people and specifically as Black women. Namhlanje, I would like to share with you a collage of possibly unrelated thoughts, quotes, poems, and stories in pursuit of an umbilical cord. Dr. Wanelisa Xaba, alongside Dr. Nomalanga Mkhize and Dr. Uhuru Palafala, wrote, "When the colonial classroom fosters a metaphysical death, the decolonial classroom must be a place in which students and educators, in their fluid roles, are encouraged to feel deeply. Second, the decolonial classroom shifts from an execution ground to a place of recovering. Mkhize urges that we are born with an umbilical sensibility. I insist that knowledge located in coloniality disconnects this intuitive knowing. The matriarchive, or the Black women's gendered ways of knowing, as stated by Dr. Palafala, a world making, are the decolonial feminist praxis. Recovering is to travel backwards with time and to reconnect the severed umbilical cord. Recovering is to remove the colonial veil and to allow oneself to be recovered by one's grandmother's prayers and rituals of care. In what felt like ukumamela umuntu omdala around a fire, Ambassador Thenjiwe Mdiso spoke of women being robbed of their role as cultural annexes through the loss of intsomi namabali. She spoke of indigenous languages as carriers of cultural voices, identity, history, and vessels through which we invoke ancestry and tradition. She spoke of the absurdity of ukunqula ngesingesi and asked, what knowledge is lost when we translate Ubuntu into English? What nuance is lost when we teach African medicine without its linguistic context? I'm quite a fragmented person, so ndiyathemba uba nizawo, but ndizawo. Okusalayo sizawo. In 2017, I received a phone call. On that call, a man told me that I have a snake in my stomach, and every move I make forward will be followed by 2 moves back. Uyathwasa, kwaye ukungavumi kwakho kukuzigcina ebumnyameni ngoba abantu abadala kudala bekulindile. My father passed away in 2008. In preparation for the funeral, I went to buy a tie for my younger brother. A woman came up to me and asked my name. Ngowakwa Ganjo? Abasefalbang? Ungumntana kaMaxole? Okay. Uyazazi phofu umelba unxibe intsimbi emhlophe. I looked at the pearly white beads on my arms. Oh no, these are just for decoration. No, uyatwasa, she says. And I have no idea what that means. At this time, I have no frameworks to understand what this woman is saying. I can barely speak isiXhosa, and I have never heard of uktwasa in my life. Most importantly, my Xhosa vocabulary is a small sliver of what remains when our parents' dreams lead us into the lion's den of colonial education in hope that we will become something less oppressed than them. My mother, after reaching out to a better knowing cousin, advises that I find a church. Interestingly, in describing the church, both of them cannot describe the church that will help me in English. Funeka uye kwicawe yomoya, icawe yesintu, ezi zabelungu azizukunceda. I didn't find icawe yomoya, but I did find a way back into my mother's tongue. Dear Google, a 5-year-old girl drowns inside a swimming pool. She is gone for 5 days and they resuscitate her within minutes. At her uncle's wedding, her mother finds her hiding under the bed. There is too much death here, she says. 14 February 2017. Dear Google, a man told me there is a snake in my stomach, that every time I move forward, it pulls me back. What is a snake in the stomach, Google? How do I know if I have a snake in my stomach? Can a snake in my stomach kill me? Dear Google, what is uktwasa? What is igqirha? What is a sangoma? Is there a difference between igqirha and a sangoma? How do you know uyatwasa? What is the difference between umbilini and anxiety? What do white beads mean? What is Islau? How do I find Islau sasemayirheni? How do you remove water from between your ears? How do you know if igqirha linyansekile? What does astral travel mean? What does an ancestor look like? How does umbilini burst? What is the difference between uktwasa and bipolar? What is the difference between sage and impepho? Answer me, Google. Xa sibuza amathambo siyambona umntana ebekelwe indlu yabantu abadala. Dear Google, why is the goat staring at me? A boy disappeared by the river when he was 9 years old. 3 years later, his sister met inkosazana yasemanzini, who told her to return with a cow in exchange for the boy. When he emerged, he was draped in reeds and could command the wind. Will I be okay, Google? What is the significance of the blue-eared starling? What does it mean if a frog appears in your path? Dream interpretation. An army of apes carry me on a silver palanquin. What is the spiritual meaning of a monkey's wedding? What do black beads mean? What is the English word for ukugaba? Kuphi embo? Why is the toilet full of snakes? Google. Google, are you there? In her essay Towards a Revolutionary Feminist Pedagogy, Bell Hooks writes, "For as long as university settings are at the central site for the production of theory and academics are simultaneously engaged in a competitive work arena that supports and perpetuates all forms of domination, feminist theorists will need to be conscientious about not supporting monolithic notions of theory. We will need to continuously assert the need for multiple theories emerging from diverse perspectives in a variety of styles. In a world constantly skeptical of the bone reader, it is quite astonishing that at no point we ask ourselves if the bone reader is skeptical of the encyclopedia. In a village outside Port St. John's in the Eastern Cape, there is a sacred healing place called Isinuka. People travel far and wide to experience these mud baths, hot springs, and methylated vapor holes that are believed to cure physical, emotional, and spiritual ailments. Legend has it that traditional leaders once tried to sell the area to developers for commercial purposes. The developers erected fences around the springs with the hope of creating a resort or exclusive tourist attraction. Instead, the springs dried up and erected outside the fence. Confused but undeterred, the developers bought more land and extended their property to include the new springs. The springs dried up again and again until the traditional leaders called in the traditional healers to provide counsel. The healers told the developers that what you are trying to buy is not yours to buy, that the springs belonged to all who needed them, and that life is not only for those with money, because life is not from people, it is from the Creator. Once upon a time, it took a village to raise a child, and in some places it still does, which is to say some places still have community. To acknowledge community is to know that on all sides of breath, we are not alone. I am my father's clan and my mother's clans. I am the clans of the women who birthed them and the clans of the women before them. I am the cat that visits when you enter a new home, and the bees nesting at the entrance of a passage when I have lost my way. When a child is born, umdlezana uyanqungwa ngomama belali, who allow her space for her body to heal. When a woman marries, uhamba nempelesi yokumncedisa xa ezawugodisa. Umvandedwa is a deep-seated loneliness that comes from being sick. It is something to be healed. Umilisi Uthando Bongela says it beautifully. These things like loneliness were carefully thought about and planned for by the people we come from. The organization of a society was consciously implemented to avoid the state of isolation that many suffer from today. There is a long litany of respects for ukukapha, which makes up the threads of our culture. Ngesintu, when we pick plants for medicine, siyahlamba. Xa singamagqirha sinxiba intsimbi sihloniphe. We ask that the spirit of the plant heals the spirit of the body. We understand that medicine can only heal what the soul is ready to heal. We understand that we human beings are not guardians of the earth. We are in community with it. We are a part of it, and it is a part of us. When we bleed onto the ground, we feed it, and the ground is nourished, and in turn feeds us. In South Africa, we are said to have the highest suicide rates of men in the world and the third of women. This is according to a Mail and Guardian statistic released by the SA Depression and Anxiety Group that reported a 40% increase of volume since September 2021. Umama tells me that umakhulu notamkhulu wakhe, okhokho bam, were a proud, wealthy family. Her grandfather was called Usajin. Yena nomampila had livestock and lived on a huge plot of land. They would ride their horses to Lady Frey and trade tobacco. Umama says okhokho farmed tobacco. She remembers that when she was younger, she loved to visit them because wonke umzukulwana wayinepayinti yakhe nesitya sakhe. They would stand in line and get milk straight from the cow. Food was plentiful, and you could eat fresh fruits until your stomach turned. In the evenings, they would sit around the fire and listen to Intsomi. Ukhokho would smoke his pipe, and abazukulwana would sit around their feet, listening attentively to Intsomi about udyakalashe, who tricked the weaver bird into a song so he could steal her bread. Umama says ihashi likakhokho only responded to him. To trick it, one would have to wear ukhokho's coat while carrying a silver dish and call the horse only once so it would lift its head. If you called it more than once, it would recognize that you were not ukhokho and would not respond. Umama can't remember exactly when the trust arrived or how it happened that they took the land and the livestock. And no one in the village knows why these people who looked like ghosts were called the trust. What do we know? But what we do know is that there are places such as Ehoita, Ekashasneke, Emhlabeni, that remained untouched by the trust. The villages were too far into the mountains or forests and somehow escaped the gluttonous colonial ravage. In such areas, traditional rituals, practices of healing, planting, child rearing, and burial remains somewhat unaffected by westernization. People still remain largely self-sufficient, rarely see the need to go into neighboring towns or seek government assistance. They grow their own food, keep their livestock, weave their own clothes. People still rely on amayeza that grow widely and freely because they have little to no access to Western biomedical systems. These areas are also green and lush and rich with natural water supplies that seem quite unaffected by the devastating drought that is currently facing the Eastern Cape. We grew up being told that these places were filled with witchcraft. Utatomkhulu Wale Sirote wrote, "We page through each other's faces. We read each looking eye. It has taken lives to do so, to move like a tortoise. We journey home. Where are we that we are not home? Ah, it is a long story, this. That is why we page every face and read each look and move like a tortoise." Are we still together? I'm almost done, I promise. When the rain does not fall for as long as it has not fallen now, the elders go up the mountain. Amagqirha nabathandazeli namaxhegwazana. Those who have legs that can still carry them over rocks, who have lived long enough to win favor with the mountains. Those who are called to give counsel when there is conflict. Umakazi says the rain is right not to fall. Iza kuwela ntoni imvula amasimi ehleli engasetyenziswa? Abantwana bagcwele idolophi bakhangelana nento abangayaziyo. Siphalele singabantu. We have spilled out of God's hands. For some people who still listen to the wind, a newborn baby and a mother are kept in a room until the umbilical cord falls off. The baby is still water. The child remains unseen outside close family and friends, outside close family until they have reached 3 months. For some people, children and grandparents are said to whisper knowledge from the other side. In the forests, the child born in his sack is the child who will ride the leopard. He will grow at the feet of the one who rides the leopard today. In the mountains, there is an old woman who can help you remember your dreams. Xa sisenza inguqulo, funeka silande abantu abadala. Engetheni kukomkhulu ngendawo. Ukurholonqa kukuvula indlebe sibone ngamehlo omphefumlo. Xa siwela kukomkhulu sihamba nabantwana nabantu abadala. Kukho abakhwetha abafunwa emanzini. Otata abaphethe umqombothi nebhokhwe. Yonke into, wonke umuntu funeka bewelile. Ithi lento xa abantu beza kwenza inguqulo bayazila. Bacenge izihlwele, bacele abantu abadala badibane ngentloko. Bacenge abantu beziduko bajike bajonge ngasendlini ukuze izinto zekhaya zilunge, kuvuleke, abantu baphile. Inguqulo zange yenziwa ngumuntu omnye. I am born under the rock. My father gave me fire. My mama gave me water. I am 3 in 1. I am fallen from the stars into my mother's belly, shining into the world. I am spiritual. I am born under the rock. Utata undiphe umlilo, umama undiphe amanzi. I am 3 in 1. I am fallen from the sky. Ndawela esifubeni sika mama wam. This is from Children of the Soil by Thandi Somerswayo. Ekhaya Khulu, our homestead is the last house, FL Bank, Engqingweni. From our house to the next village is a 4.5 kilometer climb up a narrow winding mountain. Most people in our village still do not have cars. My grandmother never used to close the gate. For a long time, there was no gate to close. People always knew that they could get a slice of bread or a glass of water to help them along the way. At her funeral, the women of FL Bank and surrounding villages came bearing knives and aprons, offering condolences and helping hands. Some brought bags of rice and sugar and scones and tea. Others washed the big black pots. This is how stokvels are formed, by pooling together the little we had to make enough for everyone. Singabantu abakaphanayo because we are a people of witness and of community. To translate ourselves is to become displaced paupers begging for handouts and a place at a dinner table designed to exclude us. It is to forget that we are the weaver birds who once rode the sky with bread in our beaks. It is to forget ourselves, to allow the decay to fill our branches and poison our fruit. We are dreamers, kodwa asivuki namathongo ethu. Siyoyika ukulala. We are lonely. The bees have settled, and they will not leave until we do something about it. We are alone. The rains have washed away our roof, and we still refuse to come home. Sithi osajen, leletu eliash. We are the children of stokvels and grandmothers and the bottomless pot. Sigabantwana bamayeza, nomhlaba. And we have forgotten that we can ride the wind. Xa ndisithi ndingumamyirha, umzondi, uziyeka, usampu, gagibe, thambo lenyoka lihlabela imzondayo. Xa ndisithi uyirha yena uzalwa ngudlomo, uhlanga, umadiba, usophitsha, uyemyem, uvela bembhenzele. Xa ndisithi mna ndizalwa ngucirha, uncibano, unojaholo, uqhanqolo, untswentswe, sihlobo sikaphalo, hlobo lalidala nembondo, umgcaleka. Xa ndisithi yena uzalwa ngundungwane, ubhejula, udiya, ugungu, undarhala, uqhwesha, umageza, umaqatha likhulu, ungqolomsila, usophitsha, uyemyem, uvela bembhenzele. I am saying that noba kungenzeka ntoni, nanini na, Even when I do not remember, I have access to a compass and a blueprint. And in this way, I will never be lost. Amen.
Enkosi, ngicela uhlale lapha. Thank you, Enkosi Sisvi. Thank you so much for reclaiming the language. I wish the non-Xhosa speakers would hear what she was saying. You can hear with the click that she's saying something very profound. Thank you for reclaiming what we are and what we've forgotten. You've shown me the part where our parents did throw us into the den, right? And then we have a responsibility to ensure that it ends with us. Because our languages are beautiful. Our GPSs are important so that we never get lost. So thank you for that offering, sis. Can I please have another round of applause? We're going to move to our next speaker. Dr. Tigo's from here. He's from home. He's going to tell us about the policy, the curriculum, and the institutional transformation. So, Doc, when you come, I'll be reading your bio. All right. So, Dr. Mlamli Tigo is a senior lecturer at the Department of African Languages here at home at Unisa, where he specializes in Xhosa language and literature, positioning his scholarship at the intersection of linguistic inquiry and literary interpretation. His research trajectory, which integrates gender studies, general linguistics, and African literary tradition, is grounded in the critical interaction with the contemporary social, cultural, and political dynamics. With publication in various academic platforms, he serves as a supervisor to postgraduate students. Colleagues, can we please give him a warm welcome?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bethuna. Ndifikile. Ayisebenzile? Come on this okay. Ndiyevakala? Okay, thank you. Bethuna ndifikile. Ngifaka izibheki sinizanibona kahle. My name is Mlamli. Ndiyalamla. And my surname is Diko. I want us to have a dialogue on the sub-theme African languages in the academy between policy and practice. And I think this is an interesting gathering because one way or the other, all of us are affected by issues of language directly or indirectly. And we have to dialogue in instances where there are elements or vestiges of oppression, because the idea is to ensure that indigenous African languages specifically are not only promoted, but they are also visible in the true sense of visibility. So I do recognize all of you, the organizers, the staff, students, but in this intellectual dialogue, I want us to reflect or think or consider our experiences in engaging through or with language, either as teachers, researchers, or just language users in general. This dialogue, in fact, what I need to indicate that let me skip that because I don't want to go on and on. When I received the invitation, by the way, to come and support this symposium, a question immediately occurred in my mind. Should we really still be discussing reclaiming African languages, identity, knowledge, and educational transformation in 2026? And I mean, have our policies not already transformed enough? And indigenous African languages not fully visible in our institutional cultures, lecture halls, Senate meetings, and research publications. And our institutions, I will include universities and colleges, have they not already moved beyond the strange miracle where a university can sit in Africa, recruit African students, study African realities, but still function almost entirely through colonial linguistic hierarchies? One would think that by now, policy implementation would be faster than the speed at which institutions produce strategic plans, frameworks, and task teams. Or perhaps transformation has entered a fascinating theoretical stage where African languages are fully recognized in policy documents but mysteriously absent in action, postgraduate supervision, assessment practices, and institutional power itself. So yes, perhaps the real irony is that the question is not why are we still discussing African languages? The real question is why, after decades of policy promises and curriculum debates, are we still having to reclaim what should never have been surrendered in the first place? And in fact, why do our institutions continue to celebrate multilingualism ceremonially, yet operationally remain stubbornly monolingual? Why do policies speak the language of transformation while institutional practices continue to speak the language of exclusion? I know, for instance, Unisa and other institutions have made significant strides or parades to mitigate this challenge. But the most fascinating institutional paradox is this: universities insist they are committed to decolonization and epistemic justice. Of course, they have to for various reasons, including politicization. Yet, the very languages carrying African knowledge systems are still treated as visitors. So maybe this symposium is not about reclaiming African languages per se. I think it is far beyond and far beneath that. Maybe it is about exposing the gap between transformation as institutional rhetoric and transformation as lived educational reality. Because policy without implementation becomes performance, and curriculum without linguistic inclusion becomes exclusion. And institutional transformation without indigenous African languages remains fundamentally flawed. And maybe I should say that without practice, without the visibility of indigenous languages and not the distorted version of these languages, because what you often see is the so-called indigenous languages that are often confined or defined using the Eurocentric lens. Which is why I normally say that insofar as we advocate for language policies, it is unfortunate that these language policies sometimes succumb to Western definitions. And I need to indicate that language policies are not entirely innocent, because how do you dictate the terms of speaking and writing a language that was never dictated in the first place? Indigenous languages developed naturally. There were no language policies. But for some reason, I think, far beneath the issue of language policies, it has unfortunately been infiltrated by, obviously, we know, colonial agents and some of the vestiges that we see even today, insofar as we claim that these languages are official, they are decolonized, but we can see the remnants of the colonial system. It is therefore a privilege and a humbling experience for me to be part of this dialogue alongside the scholars, educators, students, and practitioners who continue to insist that indigenous African languages are not peripheral to transformation, but central to the intellectual future of our institution and society. You would remember that when language is overlooked, or those who speak indigenous languages are forgotten or deliberately sidelined, they are automatically excluded from political discourse and all the conversations that we need to have, precisely because a proper discourse is attributed to the Queen's language, or sometimes Afrikaans. But because of the nature of this platform then, I have deliberately stripped my presentation of all its academic luxuries, namely theoretical frameworks and methodological issues. I have instead chosen to be more aesthetic, integrating theory into the discussion, but not necessarily scrutinizing how theories are connected to the reflection herein. It is that kind of a dialogue, or ingxoxo okanye ingxoxo, into which you can read a number of theories, for example, memory and historical consciousness, sociolinguistic and sociocultural theories. I think my colleagues here, they have implicitly made reference to such. Africanism, Ubuntu, humanity to others, Marxist ideologies, and to a certain extent, critical and political discourse analysis. An MIT approach, so to speak. But I know how sensitive you are about your languages. That is why I wish to indicate that before I get you all confused further with my adopted foreign or Queen's language, I assure you that I have not in the least adopted its culture, neither its mentality nor philosophy, or its linguistic profundity. Only the words will be in English, but the rest underneath the words is isiXhosa. With the pragmatic idea in mind that we are from a diverse, multilingual, and multicultural background, or rather a multicultural postmodernistic background, I therefore propose that I will speak isiXhosa in English. But the ideological theme of this symposium, which is reclaiming African languages, identity, knowledge, and educational transformation, is a poignant balance between what could have been, what was done, and what was not done. Accordingly, it is less a celebratory statement or movement of progress than a diagnostic lens through which to assess the uneven trajectories of linguistic justice, epistemic inclusion, and educational reform. But more fundamentally, it is a reflection on a deferred transformation, how aspirations for linguistic justice were repeatedly articulated yet unevenly translated into institutional practice, leaving a persistent and uncritical gap between policy intent and educational reality. When moving away from rhetoric and focusing on how institutions actually work, the key questions become practical and diagnostic. At the University of South Africa, for instance, which is where we are now, and other online distance institutions, the main questions to consider in our context, and we have to be honest, one, what concrete institutional mechanisms exist to ensure staff capacity material development and scholarly output in indigenous African languages beyond policy commitments? 2, how is access defined in a distance education context? Does it include linguistic accessibility or only technological and geographic access? So that is our case. But then I am cognizant that a counterpoint is necessary to these questions. Large-scale institutions often argue that linguistic diversification must be gradual due to resource constraints, scalability issues, and standardization demands in assessment. But the critical issue, however, is whether these constraints or limitations are treated as temporary logistical obstructions or as permanent justification for maintaining the status quo. But the answer to the questions that I asked earlier does not necessarily reside in policy text alone, nor in rhetorical commitments to transformation. They are located in the institutional hidden curriculum, the actual practices through which knowledge is produced, validated, and then circulated. So, I will skip one part. Don't too much, stop. Okay. I want us to think of the 4 interconnected areas based on the discussion that we just had now. Firstly, in curriculum design and assessment structures where language choice silently determines what counts as legitimate knowledge and what is treated as translation or support material rather than the epistemic core. But secondly, in institutional resourcing and infrastructure, including staffing, academic development and material production, which reveal whether indigenous African languages are treated as strategic priorities or symbolic tools, more like tokenistic instruments. Thirdly, in everyday pedagogical practice at institutions like Unisa, where distance education standardizes English as the default cognitive medium under the pressure of scalability, even when multilingual policy exists on paper. But what I need to emphasize is that the unfortunate part with the universities or any organizations for that matter who purport to advance indigenous languages, in large part, you can just see it's a matter of ticking boxes, which is why some previously white universities, when you get somebody who graduates a master's or PhD in an indigenous language, it becomes a big celebration that please see us that we are doing something. I attended one conversation. I think the speaker was Dr. Mzileni, and he indicated that, for instance, in the case of Rose University, when in 2016 or so, or 2017, produced its first PhD thesis, it was a big thing, simply because of previously white university, if it is the case. But there are other universities who have been doing it, like the University of Zululand, which he says produces one of the highest number of dissertations and theses in isiZulu. And therefore it is indeed true that we have been hijacked by politicization. We have been hijacked by some colonial agents who masquerade as, should I say, advocates for indigenous languages. But the last point I want to include is that in scholarly authority and knowledge validation systems, journals housed by Unisa Press, Oasis, I forgot the others, postgraduate supervision and research evaluation, where the epistemic gatekeeping function determines which linguistic worlds are allowed to count as academic. I'll give you just an example. Most academic journals, or in general in the academic community, you will get a sense that if you produce your work in indigenous languages, the question is, who will read that? You won't get visibility, marketing, and you can see the status or the stature that continues to be attached to the colonial languages. And unfortunately, I do not think some of the publishing houses like your Unisa Press, your Taylor and Francis, and many others, I do not think they're doing enough to ensure the visibility of indigenous languages. And look, for instance, in cases where indigenous languages are used to produce knowledge, it is compulsory that you provide a summary in English. That is the unfortunate part. And it's just an imbalance and unfairness to indigenous languages, because articles or works that are produced in English, they don't make it compulsory that you must have a summary in isiXhosa. They don't. And the worst case scenario then is when you write your article or chapter or whatever that you work on, and then you submit, and then you are told that academically, this is not how you should construct your sentences or use language. Then you are given an example in English, which in this case, English is used as a standard of measurement and dictatorship for indigenous languages. And you know, it seems as though some publishing houses have inadvertently fallen victims or succumbed to some colonial mentalities. It is the truth, whether we accept or we don't, but in reality, that's what happens. English is used as a standard of measurement for indigenous languages, Prof, unfortunately. You must follow the English syntax, morphology, and all these other branch of linguistics that construct a language. This is the unfortunate part. But this is where I want to get to. Nisakhona though? Okay. Thanks. Okay. Now, let us move to the next part of our conversation. The showcasing of cutting-edge research and developments alongside practical classroom implementation in the pre-service training future teachers of indigenous African languages is quite an enigmatic conception when one considers the long and uneven history of African languages, particularly in the past and arguable even more sharply in the last 30 years of democracy. This symposium then is actually another reminder or wake-up call for indigenous African languages cultural repository when one considers the words of S.E.K. Mqhayi, who is considered by many the father of isiXhosa language and literature, that the speakers of African languages should respond to the challenge of making indigenous languages autonomous, independent of English in their grammar, literature, and linguistic progress, and to conscientize the speakers to work towards protecting the rights of African so as to retain their dignity and history. He stretches it out to the classroom to suggest methods of teaching such as 1, human language technology, 2, the folklore method of teaching, a point reiterated by Jaxa 2023, 3, play game or gameplay teaching, 4, teaching through songs and music, all in the interest of language preservation and it as an economic instrument. But what should no longer be a question in the 21st century and beyond is whether African languages are capable of carrying science, technology, philosophy, law, or advanced education, because that doubt itself is a residue of colonial epistemology and not an objective linguistic fact. The real intellectual challenge is whether institutions possess the courage and historical honesty to invest in these languages as fully fledged systems of knowledge, innovation, memory, consciousness, and economic production, instead of continuously treating them as cultural ornaments invited into academia only after the serious work has already been done and done elsewhere. You know what I also find confusing regarding that, the point I just made? Sometimes you get new developments, strategic, whatever, they introduce all these things. And then later, the question is, what about indigenous languages? What are we going to do when you've adopted the whole thing for whoever has powers? They do that. Now you are stuck with this document in English. And for us who write in indigenous languages, isiXhosa, I wrote my master's in isiXhosa and my PhD in isiXhosa, and I enjoyed it. Oh, it was very nice. And my first article came out in isiXhosa, by the way. And I've written others in isiXhosa, fighting with editors. They tell you, no, that the syntax tells you that one, but I said, but that one is English. The one for isiXhosa, for instance, will tell you that you can't begin a sentence using and. But in isiXhosa, you can't do that. Or you can start a sentence in a conjunction. But unfortunately, we are forced to succumb to the grammar of English. That's the unfortunate part, which is why in most cases, the students that I am working with, they know, I do tell them that even if you speak Isimpondo, you can express yourself because that's who you are. I'm not going to tell you that use this version of isiXhosa, because it's a repetition of the historical injustices. So, and you know the bone of contention around standardized versions of languages and dialects. Because, for instance, in Ndilimpondo, and then what are you going to say? That's who I am. That's my language. I grew up speaking that. It makes sense to me. And how come I come and say, no, use this standard version of it? Who dictated on that and decided that we should speak like this? Why are we decided for our indigenous languages, by the way? But as I approach the end, as far as I'm concerned, African languages are still under siege from elements within and outside their respective provinces. That they are part of the South African official languages designation is a myth, as long as they are not seen to be believed, spoken to be respected, and written to be preserved. In other words, the mainstreaming of African languages, isiXhosa in my case, to be used in the controlling domains such as science, technology, human sciences, economics, law, no doubt will be a means to open the past to scrutiny, reading it in order to illuminate it and transform it into part of our living and changing society. Sometimes when you speak about issues of language, as sensitive as they are, and when you point the real culprits, somewhere in the colonial and apartheid system, we are told that, let it go, get over it. Don't go to the colonial system. You can't blame everything on colonialism. Of course, you can't blame everything on colonialism, but you can critique and scrutinize its vestiges. Otherwise, we cannot be oblivious to truth. And in fact, we can argue day in, day out that Okay, let me just move on something else real quick. The post-colonial phenomenon or debate should not mislead us into thinking that colonialism actually ended. No. Which is why I consider the prefix post as not necessarily suggesting that the past has ended. We see its little babies that it has given in institutions like your typical Stellenbosch. We had a case at some point about issues of language and many other universities. These linguistic injustices are a reflection that, in fact, colonialism and the apartheid system just changed its form, shape, here and there. But in large part, the colonial agents are scattered in our institutions, ready to stop indigenous languages and their visibility. So, in other words then, okay, let me skip that. I'm going to skip some parts and go to the important points. But if you do want this talk, I can prepare it nicely and format it, and then I will share it with the colleagues I was working it. Then if you want to engage, it's okay. Now, it is important then, claiming official status without epistemic authority is like declaring a language sovereign while denying it entry into the laboratories, courtrooms, economic models, and algorithmic spaces where reality is actively produced. It is administrative poetry masking structural disparity. The system, in its technical sophistication, has perfected what can only be described as a high-precision form of linguistic oppression dressed up as multilingual democracy. Now, the concern then that I have is in instances where indigenous languages are used just as decorative tools. For instance, in the decision-making process, speakers of indigenous languages and indigenous communities are not included. But the language will only appear as a translated document that you have it. And then are you happy? But you are not part of the decision. The language has to speak to people, indigenous communities, especially those that have been forgotten. But then, one would have also expected official language status to be matched by serious institutional investment in intellectual infrastructure, funding, material support through universities. Yet, the persistent absence of such resourcing uncovers a structural contradiction and hypocrisy that undermines the very logic of linguistic equality and produces measurable disparities in knowledge production capacity. For isiXhosa, for instance, showcasing cutting-edge research and developments and practical classroom implementation is an essential idea, in fact, for all indigenous languages, those that we know and those that we don't know, including dialects. But not without impediments, some of which are main constructs. Okay, in a minute. But one has to break down doors and hurdle over people's heads fighting for language rights. And the question is, why? So we can end there. Thank you very much. I will share the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doc. I'm sorry for cutting you short. It's just that we're really behind time. But thank you so much for that offering. Can we please give him another round of applause? So, colleagues, we have 15 minutes for questions, comments. We're just going to have a conversation for the next 15 minutes. Can ask it to any of our panelists. And then we'll have a 10-minute comfort break, and then we'll come back at 11:40 for our next session. So can I please have the mics rotate around? And then I'll take 3 questions. Oh, you can ask from here actually. I'll ask 3 questions. I'll take 3 questions per round. And please be precise and to the point. It's not a presentation, it's a comment, it's a question. So, maximum 2 questions or comments. Thank you so much. So I'll start with you, Dr. Kobe, and then Uti in the green. Do we have any other one? And then Uputuam Apa Pezulu in the green. You can start one. Speak up.
So that we can be based on practice and we don't just do things that are theoretical and they don't speak to the real experience on the ground. Because this is a pressing matter, because within the public there are politicians and scholars who proudly, of course, we've used these terms without analyzing them and critically reflecting on them. When you say, okay, Africa didn't have borders. Africa didn't have the European borders, but Africa had its own ways of guarding what is theirs, and also of engaging with other communities. Someone even said the rivers and all these things, you spoke about the rivers, the mountains, there were people who will be situated within these particular spaces. So it might not have been borders from Europe, but there was a way to establish the sovereignty of that particular, whether it was a tribe or whatever. And Bigo speaks about this. So I want to pick your mind so that we make these beautiful things we talk about. Sometimes our white counterparts say that we romanticize pre-colonial Africa. We must make them practical. What does that mean for the ordinary person in the townships who cannot make a living right now in South Africa? Because they are black and they are apparently uneducated and unskilled. So I want us to bring it to the... And then we had here last year the Prime Minister coming here for language, and he said to us, well, we have money, but our money now is spent somewhere else. So, I mean, how do we prioritize language without making others feel like they are being excluded? For example, he made an example that most of the money now is being spent in courts, translating for immigrants, where people have to outsource people who speak indigenous language from those countries so that the cases can go on in court. So how do we balance these things? Giving people's rights, but also pushing forward with the South African agenda. And I will speak as a South African because I know only South Africa. How do we push forward our indigenous language when we have to also deal with other things that have been layered to us by the South African government? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roman. That's killing me with time. So you can go.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Mienda from Unisa Radio. My question will go straight to Dr. Biko. So, Doctor, when we speak about reclaiming African languages within higher education, conversation often focuses on policies, or rather policy, curriculum, and institutional transformation. From a perspective, are South African universities moving fast enough in transforming these areas to a meaningful, including African language in teaching, research, and academic knowledge production? And I also want to say to, just a remark on what you said, that when you express yourself in indigenous language, it's very easy for us to understand each other, and there is no barrier where there's no policies. And that's beautiful. I also have a same issue when it comes to English. I don't know. I have the same issue when it comes to it because it has so much policies and it have limited a lot of indigenous people when it comes to opportunities and how to express themselves in an environment where there is Western people who don't understand our indigenous languages. So I just want to thank you for that conversation where you highlighted that it's very important to also know that our language is our GPS. We can connect with it. I can talk isiTsonga, I'm Tsonga by the way. I can talk isiTsonga, but people in the room can understand me. Even when they did not learn isiTsonga, but they would know that I was saying that my tummy is painful. So thank you so much, Doctor, for that insightful conversation today.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think my question more or less is directed to the academic field. I was starting with this thing. This is in a proverb. It say, walk. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. So, in the academic space, do we also push for reading, citing, diversity? Is it allowed for me publishing in isiZulu or stethoscope? Can I cite Sotho? Can I cite from journals from Pedi, from Tonga? The fragmentation of the tribalism, of the tribal clashes. Do you also influence in that regard academics, Ole? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Putu. I think that's really a good question. That's why we need the intergenerational conversation, right? Do you want to take any of those? Also try to be short and and then I think any of you can actually answer. You can.
Okay, Molweni again. I think you're putting me in a tight spot in this question. So I heard two questions, one around sovereignty, Pan-Africanism, and an indigenous kind of outlook or understanding of this. And I'm thinking immediately of Aufika elalini, like as someone who is not known in a particular village. You have to introduce yourself to the chief, and then the chief will ask you a series of questions, and kuzawubakho umuntu ozawukwazi ukulanda. Ukulanda is to trace you, to find out, are you someone who will possibly bring harm into the community, or are you someone who is going to be able to live in the community in the way that the community functions? Once that has been established, you are welcomed and allowed to be a part of the community. And I think that if we think about this very practically, in the case of South Africa, there are many instances where there is no introduction or a way of conversation that says, here is a new neighbor. This new neighbor does not mean harm, is also looking to make a living in this community. And I think that that is a fundamental difference, because I'm thinking particularly around, there were a lot of people who were brought in pre-94 in order to try and assist with making sure that the votes would, we don't have that conversation. We don't want to have that conversation. And then you bring a whole group of people and you put them into a particular community, but you don't tell the community what you're doing. You don't tell the community who these people are and why these people have been brought here, but you expect that everyone is just going to function as if singabantwana and we are being instructed to get along, rather than adults and families that are being encouraged to commune. And I think that fundamentally at the heart of so much that we are experiencing is a lack of an introduction and a building of trust that allows, the fostering of trust that allows us to see that sonke sizokhangela impilo. And then black, uneducated, unskilled. I think that I believe very much in apprenticeship. I believe in, the one who is going to learn to ride the leopard learns from the one who rides the leopard today. And I think that if we were thinking about this again, because our indigenous knowledges provide us with so many frameworks for understanding things, then we would understand that, I was having an interesting conversation with Udok over there this morning just about how in Igbo communities, if you are skilled, you're going to come into come and as in work with me, and then even if I'm not necessarily paying you with money, but I take care of your housing and your food and make sure that you are cared for and you have the well-being. But then after a set amount of years, I start you off by financially investing in you being able to now move into the same business. And move you forward. And I think these are ways in which we as people know things.
Thank you. I picked up 2 questions. Others were input. The question on how do we strike a balance in a situation where there is an added load to the project of developing indigenous languages. It is unfortunate that in the tapestry of trying to advance and intellectualize and ensure the visibility of indigenous languages, there are other issues that affect society. We cannot isolate indigenous languages, in particular indigenous South African languages. You will find these layers of other complexities added to the process.
Okay. All right, colleagues. Doctor. Thank you so much. Sorry for the short break. Okay, thank you, colleagues. We're going to move to the next session, which is technology and knowledge production, which will be given by Ms. Upelu Tole, who is a Deputy Director of Human Language and Technology at DSEC. Aus Upelu Kibonile Tole, like I said, she's from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, Republic of South Africa. She's a language practitioner, technologist and a translator with extensive experience spanning classroom, education, parliamentary language services, and national language policy implementation. A native of Mamutla village in the Northwest Province, she began her career as a teacher of Setswana and English at Galaletsang High School in Kuruman before joining the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa as a language practitioner specializing in Setswana translation. She subsequently joined the Department of Sports and Culture when she served as the chief practitioner, editing in terminology developmental section. She currently holds a position in the Department of Human Language Technologies, HLT unit, where she manages a portfolio of projects at the intersection of language, technology, and national development. Her project responsibilities encompass the corpus of signed place names, interactive educational forms, the documentation and technological development of indigenous endangered indigenous languages, including Namakob, how do I say it? Nabakoba and Nu. Is that how you say it? Nu. The development of application and system for colloquial language varieties and the construction of larger language models, LLMs, with a particular focus on SAL. She additionally trains translators in the use of Omega T, a computer-assisted translation CAT tool. A freelancer English to Setswana translator. Tole works across the range of registered sectors and translating school curricula, children's literature, university tutorial material, technical manuals, and corporate documentation. Her work reflects a sustained commitment to the revitalization, preservation, and technological advancement of South Africa's indigenous language. Colleagues, can we please give her a warm welcome? Zenama.
Hello. Dumelang bagaetsho. Ale tlotse. Ke nna o pelo thole. Ke mosetsana wa motlhaping wa Cuba e ntsho ya ga maditlhong. Ya re banna ba tshaba noga basadi ba e bolaya. Ke tlogola ko gara sebe mme ke kokomane ko gara motsehela. Ke koilane phuduhudu ena ka lengwe hela mme yone ba re ga nke bogolwa ke dintja. It is both an honor and privilege for me to speak with you this morning. Yeah, we're still in the morning on this great event, the Symposium on Reclaiming African Languages, Identity, Knowledge, and Educational Transformation. I've been asked to focus on the sub-theme, South African Digital Language Resources, Building Infrastructure for African Language AI. The Human Language Technologies Unit, HLT Unit, of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture provides financial support towards the development of language technologies that assist in bridging the digital divide, providing people with access to information that has been inaccessible, enabling physically and technologically challenged people to use computers and other technologies, enabling official language speakers to use their mother languages and requesting services or access to information. All the projects funded by the department are open source, meaning that the deliverables are made freely available to anyone for research, use, study, whether they want to modify or distribute such deliverables. And over the past years, HLT has funded and monitored the development of a variety of projects on different fields of language. My work at the department entails supporting and managing these human language technology projects, and seemingly potential users, and including yourselves, are not aware of the availability and capabilities of these tools. And so those tools just end up not being utilized. I would like to point out a few completed and running projects of the department which facilitate the building of African language artificial intelligence. I will start with the development of digital resources which promote and preserve African languages, and in a way that would be, decolonizing artificial intelligence. I will speak in my context. I will speak regarding what I do at the department. We As I said, there are those resources, the digital resources that have been developed. I will start with the learning platforms. We have two recently completed projects. The one was developed by the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the name of the project is Online Platform for the Immersive Learning of isiZulu. Now, there is also another one. It has been completed. It's Ngiyaqonda, Applying Voice Computing Technology to Language Literacy. That's the name of the project, and it was developed by CSIR. Both these projects contribute to the intellectualization of African languages. This, the concept here, intellectualization of African languages, simply refers to the development of languages for academic and professional use. In most cases, from preschool to university and beyond, learners and students are taught to read and think in English. In order to achieve intellectualization of African languages, we need to replace English as the default language and see African languages as languages of instruction or assessment, or even a language that we can produce knowledge in. Academic research is mostly published in English, and I commend the growing interest of scholars to publish in their mother tongues. I think Doctor has alluded to that he published his thesis in isiXhosa. And one of the most interesting things was one of my lecturers at Northwest University, Dr. Bowe, who also wrote her thesis in isiXhosa. Now, that is not the only thing that we do, developing learning platforms. We also look into the development of South African Sign Language. And there are three, I've just chosen three projects that we have funded, which focus on bridging the communication gap between the deaf and hearing communities through digital tools. And we have one project with RIA. RIA, it's a company, and the name of the project is Digitalization of the South African Sign Language. This company, known as RIA, has developed a remote South African Sign Language interpreting system and an online South African Sign Language Dictionary. The interpreting system can be used to create and join meetings. And the online dictionary has about 15,000 signs. And in this case, it will be the videos for alphabets and other signs. I wish I had time, because I was going to share the links and show you that they are actually functional. It can also be used to search for South African Sign Language signs. For example, if you want to check, it's an interesting website where you can even check the word of the day. They will give even different regional variations of a particular term. So the video, the interpreting system and the dictionary can be used to learn South African Sign Language, and they have both been piloted at 2 schools around Gauteng, and they have also been deployed in the DSEC, that is the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture server, and as I've said, they are functional. So I will still share the link with you so that you can see that it is indeed nothing but the truth. I have had the opportunity of attending one of these pilots. I think it was in Philadelphia School in Soshanguve. It's a school for learners with special needs. And I could see how they interacted with the system, how it made them happy. You know, when you speak to a language that a person understands, it just makes them so happy. So I think it's something that everyone should consider, you know, getting or downloading so that they can learn South African Sign Language. There's a Pick and Pay very close to where I work, and there's a deaf worker there. I can only go as far as greeting her, but I wish I could, you know, continue any conversation with her, have a chat with her, but unfortunately I cannot. And mind you, I have attended the introductory courses, but all the time, a week thereafter, I tend to forget. But then it is because there's no practice. But with this, it's a good thing that we will all be able to practice all the time. So that was just the first project. Now the second one, it's with the University of Free State, and the name of the project is Advancing, the name is quite long, Advancing South African Sign Language for 4IR Technological Development Using Place Names. This project has developed a usable computer-readable data repository for South African Sign Language toponymy. A corpus for signed place names was built, and it's meant to build an app which can translate place names into Setswana and Sesotho. So they are concentrating on those two languages, Setswana and Sesotho, as languages of the province. So what happens with this one is that they have that corpus which can be used by researchers. It has videos. It also has a link that I will share with you. You can see the different, how they sign, the deaf community sign different place names. For example, Gauteng, they will have a way of signing it. They will show how it is signed. And with the SASL, the South African Sign Language, the only thing is it's not standardized. So you cannot have just one sign. So they give all those variations. That in Gauteng, this is how they would sign it. And remember, it's also different when someone has gone to school, maybe to a deaf school, and when it's just someone, Koma Mutla, who we just sign with and does not necessarily know the standardized. So it's quite an interesting app. You can have a look at it once I've shared the link with the chair. Now the third one, it's also with the University of Free State, and they have this tendency of very long project names. It is Inclusive Artificial Intelligence, Building Capacity and Technology for South African Sign Language, Innovation, Translation and Training. So it's a running project. It has not yet been completed. It's only in its first year. It's a 3-year project, but it seeks to generate new data sets and models which will be used in the development of baby sign. And baby sign, it's a tool that would support individuals who by any chance lose their ability to speak. If it happens that maybe one gets involved in an accident, God forbid, and they lose their ability to speak, this app this one, it's a model. It's more like data sets. It will help because then those data sets will be used to train the model to recognize that baby sign. The baby sign will be just, because sometimes at that time you won't be even able to learn SASL. So you will have those signs that we would say they are baby signs because they are not, standardized per se. I hope I'm making myself clear. Wavana English sometimes will just decide to. I would have said it much better in Setswana. Now, those already have touched on the learning platforms. I've touched on the development of SASL. And now the other resource, it's assistive technology for reading. This technology bridges the gap between text and comprehension. It includes software, devices, and digital tools designed to help individuals with visual impairment, dyslexia, or learning difficulties. The name of the project is Ndifundele, a multilingual reading aid for children in all 11 official spoken languages of South Africa, and it is developed by Sagen. Sagen, it's a company in the Western Cape. It's in Stellenbosch. It has just started, I think in February this year. So it's developing a smartphone based application for reading. They are also looking at establishing a corpus for South African child speech for HLT research and fine-tuning of automatic speech recognition models. So what happens with this one is that smartphone-based application will have reading materials. So any child will be able to read and listen at the same time to the pronunciation in that smartphone. And I think it's going to help because our kids, what they do nowadays, when they get hold of cell phones, they go straight to games. So with this one, it will be a way of teaching them. It will also help in the case of kids who have any learning difficulties. The other project that is funded by the department that has to do with assistive technology for reading is a project known as UMSI's Reader app for the blind and visually impaired. And the name of the company that is developing this is Retina SA. And they are also developing a Reader app which has features such as text-to-speech and document reading. When we went for the kick-off meeting with the project, I was impressed because team members are virtually impaired themselves. So it's an interesting app. For example, if you send them a message, a text message, then it will be converted to speech, so they'll be able to hear that message. So it's that text-to-speech feature that it has, and the document reading. It also has that option of reading for you. Is it to you or for you? Yeah. We have other technologies. Huh? Interesting, eh? The natural language processing, just known as NLP, it is a branch of artificial intelligence and computer science that gives machines the ability to understand, interpret, and generate human language. It acts, the NLP, as the bridge between human communication and computer processing. And we have a project that focuses on natural language processing. We have it with C-Text of the Northwest University in Potch. And the name of the project, it has just been recently completed. It's Python and Neural NLP resources for South African languages. Now, it has developed a Python package, not Python in the, in the other context that you may be thinking of. And it has developed quite a number of those technologies. They include tokenizers, they include sentence separators. You know, all these are chunks. You can think of them as Lego blocks that build, you know, that model. And that model will be trained. Yeah, it's going to help in the development of any language. So it also has a language identifier. In the case maybe where there is a text and you like to know which language is this text in, then you can use one of these technologies. The other resource is preservation of indigenous and colloquial languages. We have developed a multilingual Ngcuki dictionary. It features English, Ngcu language, Afrikaans, and Nomagowap languages. And it was developed to safeguard cultural identity of the Khoisan people. I think I've shared those dictionaries with you. It's a pity I could have brought some nyana, maybe 2, 3, 4. But you know, with government, the budget. Now, we also have for colloquial languages, or for a colloquial language, we have a project with Unisa. It is known as lexicography for modern day language use. And that project has developed a Mzansi-Tal app, which was formed to educate users, and I hope you are using it, about terms that are not recognized by what we have as traditional dictionaries. And I went into the app, and there was this one particular interesting term for me, my friend. I wanted to check on my friend, would they say, then, but no, it's actually, it actually refers to a Somalian, Pakistani, and it's true because even back home they would say, "Kya ko shopong ya ga my friend." So it has such, you know, interesting terms, and the nicest part, you should know about it because Kia Unisa. I think Prof. Letwala will need then to let you guys know about it so that you can use it. It's interesting. It's also interactive. So whenever you think of a term, you can share with them and you know, also give them a definition. So we also have projects that focus on archiving. We have a project, it's completed. It was with the University of Cape Town, and the name of the project is a digital application and archive of oral histories of endangered languages of South Africa. The focus was on Kgorong. I don't know how to pronounce it. Kgorong, but yeah. And Ngcu language. and those are the languages that are mostly spoken in Northern Cape. So, and some part of the Western Cape. So, luckily, they have that online archive of those languages. The glossaries are there, and the resources are accessible. Another project, it's with the Stellenbosch University. It also focuses on archiving. It developed, Leona, a multilingual corpus of annotated speech data. And Leona, it's to help researchers, maybe in the future, if they want to refer to it, they will always get that data. And it looked at the code-switched South African speech, especially from Soappies. It focused a lot on rhythm set, and especially on Prakop, because he had that, he would just switch between quite a number of languages. In the one sentence, he would speak Setswana, Sesotho, Afrikaans, Lesizulu nyana mo. So, such a corpus, it received the data set from Rhythm City, Generations, and Mobango. So, the corpus is there. There is that annotated speech data, and it will be used as a baseline for researchers if they want to develop new technologies for automatic speech recognition, and then that would be in the code switched speech. So should you maybe switch into a different language, that will be recognized because of the feature automatic speech recognition. Now, I think from the speakers, Baba William before me, never buaga like, or it's best that it would be a good thing that we have material like our indigenous languages, ne? But then at the same time we are lazy sometimes to even write and publish, and sometimes we opt for translation from the books that are there already, and I think a lot of people do not even know that the department has funded a software that helps translators work fast and more accurately. And mind you, I'm talking about a computer assisted translation, a CAT tool. I'm not talking about machine translation. I keep Google Translate. There is a difference. I get Google Translate bona erishu wena orishu leone erishu kabona it does not even think ka context. For example, ga nka kwala fela ka speed ke re ke utlwile, it will just say I've heard, when maybe now I meant I've heard it ke utlwile. Why bon? So with our application or with our software, it unfortunately, or is it fortunately, it does not do translation for you, but it helps you build a memory. So the more you use it, you are building that memory, and that memory you can share with other translators, and then in your translation you'll be consistent. And every time, the more you use it, should you have a text that is similar to what you translated before, then you know for sure that it will give you suggestions from that memory, and then your translation will be consistent. As I conclude, I would like to express my gratitude to the Chief Albert Luthuli Research Chair, Prof. Sekgalo, for extending the invitation to me to contribute in this symposium. Mawinza. Ke Motswana le yena yeah. I would also like to acknowledge that there is still a lot to do regarding the building of infrastructure for African language AI. A re tsweleleng go dira ka natla tlholang mo tisong ya one, ke a leboga.
Ra leboga Ausi Pelo. Thank you so much. Mostly also to know that the government is doing something, because we sometimes panic. But I think especially for the students and researchers, it's important to also engage these things, right? Because they're there. So doing your research and engaging them can just give them a better feedback of what needs to happen. But most importantly, I love that you guys are making sure that no one is left behind, that different impaired people also have access to this, right? Which I think is a form and way decolonizing, because we always wanted communication of a certain sort. So it's beautiful to know what the government is doing. And ke a leboga hle mma. Please give her a round of applause. So we're going to take questions, but she has to leave in 6 minutes. So what I'll do is, I think as the chair will summarize her presentation and all those projects, and then if you maybe want it, you can indicate. I'll send around the registrar. Yes. Oh, okay. So we'll email to everyone that's on the list. So please make sure that your name is on the list and that your handwriting is clear with your email. Right. Do we have any questions? Comments? All right. So we'll take 2. Is it the language practitioners also? All right.
Wow, I'm so impressed and heartened, encouraged by what you are doing. And I just want to ask what's next. So I want to just say congratulations. This is fabulous. It's just, one can see this is where it should go. So that's great. And you must tell us what's next in the pipeline, because it's very, very exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Chris Zita from Unisa Press. Opelo, the translation assistant. I remember the time I was still working in arts and culture. We're using the Ashumatu. It's still the same, or is you have the new one now?
Because our deliverables are open source, the very first application that was developed by NWU CText was Auchumato ITE, meaning the integrated translation environment. But because it's an open source, it's open for modification, for further development. It was then further developed into Omega T, which now has other interesting features. For example, the diacritics, you have them in Sepedi. I also have them in Setswana. Yeah. So yes, it has been further. It served more like a springboard for Omega T. So it's one and the same thing. Only that Omega T has been developed. I think now we are at version 6 point something. So it keeps on getting developed. Oh, yes, what's next? Oh. When was it? In 2025, we went to Uppington. Now you know our minister, ne? Minister are no. Actually, we had gone there to celebrate the contribution that Oma Katrina has made to the development of the new language. So when we were there, Minister, no, I want you guys, HLT, to come up with a project, that will benefit these people. So at the moment, we are busy with the concept development of such a project, because we need to understand, we have the budget already, we need to understand how, because already they have a dictionary. Maybe let's come up with a learning platform. So the call for proposal will be out soon for the new language project. So for now, that is, that interesting thing. And we want, because as I said earlier, people don't know what we do. They don't. And we want to make them aware. We want to come up with those awareness campaigns where we can go out and let them know what has been developed, what the department has funded. So we may, maybe at some point, come to show you, especially the interpreting system, the South African Sign Language interpreting system. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Prof.
I think you made a very critical point about the fact that many of us often don't know what the government is doing and what the government is providing. And we're very quick to judge you, rightfully so, because we keep you accountable. But I think it's also important to be in conversation with you as the government. And I think as the chair inviting you here today was also from that point that we would like to be in conversation, to see the work that you're doing, to see the possibilities that are there. We've got a number of students in the room as well. So even when it comes to funding for innovative projects that we might be having, that there is support from the government as well. Sometimes it's not well known. People don't know what you're doing or what you're funding. But I think we also need to maybe take that responsibility to also check as well online, because everything is also online, to check on the website, to learn more. So I think today was a good indicator in giving us just a snippet of the many projects and the work that the government is doing. And we will keep pushing and challenging and inviting you so that we can work together as institutions, as the government, as civil society, to say how do we respond to all the issues to get to where we want to get to. So from all of us today, we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come and be with us and share your insights and the projects that you're working on. So thank you once again. Thank you so much. Don't worry, we also need to declare now as well.
We also now have to declare the book. That was beautiful. Can we clap one more time? Towards the end, this is our last speaker. I'm excited about this, right? Because Osanele, we grew up in the same town, and we used to write that's where I met you, by the way, you don't know. We used to write Crocos Mail. I don't know if you guys know Crocos Mail, but it's the oldest newsprint newspaper in the country, in a little small town where the university that's known as Rhodes is. And they used to have this program where they had like people that aspire to be journalists come through and then write articles in that community. And I remember seeing you there. And yeah, man, I've seen you grow throughout the years, and I want to give a shout out. I'm really excited for that. So, On that tone, Umkaya. So Sanele, woke up as I read up your biography. So Sanele Kanchingana is a lecturer in the African Languages section of the School of Languages and Literature at the University of Cape Town. His PhD research traces how Xhosa-speaking intellectuals, thinkers, and activists from 1838 to 1938 conceptualized political authority through vernacular concepts such as umbuzo and umthetho during period of intense transformation in the Eastern Cape. The research brings renewed attention to figures often dismissed as mere informants or colonial collaborators, such as Qiniswa Noi and William Kekele Kei, while interpreting more widely recognized thinkers like Dio Songa, William Wellington Ngoba, and John Dingo Jabavu, not merely as Christian leaders, but as significant political theorists. His work contributes to African political theory and epistemic decolonization by foregrounding African intellectual traditions on their own terms. Kanchingana is a 2025 to 2026 Mandela Fellow at the Hashkin Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University, and a visiting fellow affiliate at the Center for African Studies at the same institution. Can we clap for Black Excellence?
Injojela yenjoli eyaba izithebe kulo msitho umbaba Fokenga unjingalwazi Puleng Sikhalo mandizibulisele kuni negqiza lonke eliququzelele lo mcimbi ndibulele ke nangesisimemo sokuba ndizokutyhuthula isicwili kulo msitho uphakame kakhulu kangaka. Lo miphambi kwenu ke nguLimakhwe uShweme uZila Mkhondo ndihamba nabo ke noTshonyane ochungwa uDikiza Kosawu amacirha ontswentswe onojaholo omhlanhla ndiyazalwa kubo. Ndiziva ke ndingumntwana emveni kwezi zithethi bezilapha phambi kwam. Sithethe izinto ezinkulu kakhulu. Ukuba bekungam bendizothi makavalwe lo msitho kuthethwe kwavokotheka. Kodwa ke ndakwenza ke amagqabantshintshi ngoko bendikuthembisile ukuba ndiza kwenza. So over the past few years I have observed with keen and growing interest the growing work of reclaiming the epistemic space for African languages within the university scholarship, from dissertations written in African languages alongside a growing body of academic books, journals, and creative outputs. And this matters on several levels, in that it acknowledges that African languages are not only vehicles of communications, but as languages of scholarship in their own right. And the fact that we have to state this, to justify this, to perform this, namhlanje, tells you a story of the constraints, of the violence, of where this conversation is taking place. In institutions in which historically and conceptually relegated abantu abantsundu to the margins. So while this on some level marks some progress, there remains some challenges. And a couple of these challenges I'll mention too. The first is institutional. And this work remains largely confined to African languages departments, as articulated earlier by my colleagues, while other departments and disciplines remain untouched by it. And the attitude that reclaiming the epistemic space for African languages and not philosophy or historical studies or engineering or botany, but a responsibility of African languages is part, in my view, of the stubborn colonial residue which persists in the universities. And the second problem is a conceptual one. More attention is paid to the communicative function of African languages than their capacities of languages of theorization. In 1982, Dr. Makalima argued convincingly in my mind that African languages were used by missionaries, but that very little of what was written in them carried little African thinking. So sometimes we can write Kwezi language, but what is the thinking that is carried by them? And we can extend this argument forward to our own moment, that it is one thing to recognize African languages as vehicles of communication, and it is another, perhaps a more difficult thing, to recognize the African thinking embedded in them, and to allow that thinking to reshape what the university does. So what is no longer a question, then, is whether African languages can be reclaimed as sites of knowledge. The question that confronts us now is how. How can they be reclaimed in the decolonization of the university scholarship? So umsebenzi wami wokuthwasela ubugqirha lwazi ndiwenza kwiziko lwezembali. And some of the major debates in that discipline have been around the question of historical sources, for example. So what counts as a historical source? The place of Intsomi, Amabali, Irairai, Imbali as repositories of historical imagination and knowledge. The move away from over-reliance on colonial and missionary archives towards African sources, multi-sensorial ways of knowing through Ingaba, kuthethile ngeNkaba, citing umsebenzi Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, ukwakha umkhanyo, umsebenzi ka Professor Kgorong, that have breathed a fresh and necessary layer into this conversation, accompanied by sustained calls to decolonize both the writing and the methods of which we're doing that work. I love unjingalwazi, uHugo, xa esithi ukwakha umkhanyo. It is to recognize black indigenous wisdom born by ancestors and elders. Before us, then, it is a deep history of attending while being grounded in this place. And yet, in the discipline of history, a sharper critique has been leveled to those who have actually turned to African language sources. And the critiques have been in two parts. And the first part is that the sources have largely been mobilized as ethnographic documents, mined for historical facts, treated as evidence, but not as carefully curated and strategically mediated bodies of knowledges. And the second part is that this mining has been done mostly by white historians who do not themselves read or understand the languages in which these sources were composed. And this results in, the result is that African language sources have entered the reconstruction of historical accounts, but they have remained overshadowed by colonial concepts and conceptual frameworks. And this has been a persistent challenge for the discipline. So while this has been the case, I want to acknowledge that there has been some pushback and there have been some beautiful experiments done by scholars working across into and outside of these decadent disciplines. And I think here of Inyati, Ingqondi, Nenkcubabuchopho, uMakhulu Thisani, uNomalanga Mkhize, Kgorong, uHlonipha Mkwena, nolunye uhlwakandiba lwezinkcubabuchopho. And their work demonstrate what becomes possible when one reads inside the conceptual life of the language rather than across it. But here is a point I want to press. So while we can write dissertations in African languages within these disciplines, we must, but in writing does not by itself solve the problem of colonial frameworks and methods. And the more urgent question in my view is how we think through and with African languages in the construction of knowledge inside and outside of the discipline, still carrying so much of these colonial residues. And I just want to make one concrete example of how, for example, I'm thinking about these things, and then I'll sit down. Because I'm the last born at home, ndizawuvala andizothetha kakhulu. So, I suppose we want to know, let's have a scenario, we want to know how, let's say 19th century, Xhosa-speaking thinkers and intellectuals were making sense of the incoming colonial rule. How they were making sense of its power, its politics, using the conceptual resources of their own indigenous political thought. Where do we turn? This at once is a question of, perhaps a question of sources or method. So if we go to the late Professor Bekisizwe Peterson and what he called the Black Public Humanities, which consist of periodicals, newspaper writings, diaries, journals, transcribed accounts, or the so-called, what we call sometimes novels, or creative text produced by African thinkers, writers, creatives, and paying, of course, close attention to the conditions under which they were produced. But source alone is not enough. Then we have to ask other harder questions of how those thinkers were thinking through and with their own languages. And by doing this, and there are others, is to look at African language. And when I say others, there are many other ways to look at this. So this is just one example. How can we maybe look at African language concepts in motion and unspooling how they were mobilized in particular texts at particular moments, attending to the meanings of these evolving concepts carried at times they were used. And I'm thinking about some of the work that has started thinking about concepts in African languages as they are moving in different places and contexts, of the work that was recently, it's not as recent now, work that was edited by Dilip Menon on thinking from the global south using these concepts. And let us take maybe a scenario now in thinking through about how these thinkers and people in the 19th century perhaps thought about political incoming colonial rulership. So we open a newspaper, and this newspaper is called Isigidimi Samaxhosa. It is published by Lovedale Press in the Eastern Cape. We open it and the year is 1880. In this year, Elijah Makiwana is the editor. John Tengo Jabavu will succeed him the following year. And William Wellington Gqoba will take over the editorial chair 4 years after that. So let us consider a debate that runs across the year about umthetho, a concept usually and blandly translated as law. In the July issue, Jabavu enters a debate that has been gathering across the preceding months about how the new generation of mission-educated intellectuals, what I call in my work as amathwasa oncwadi, the initiates of the pen, should comport themselves in the political life in the Cape Colony. And his intervention is direct. Madodana, akowethu, ndithi masifunde ulawulo lwamaNgesi, nofunda oku ukuxoxa namaNgesi. Read in English summary, this looks like an unremarkable call to civic literacy. But if you read it in its Xhosa and in its context, maybe we can, if you read closer, we can find maybe 3 things happening here. First of all, he uses the concept ulawulo. The word comes from the verb lawula. Lawula, to kuthini ukulawula? Rule, govern, to have authority over ukuphatha. Kulawula ithongo, to explain. Yes. It does not just name administration or government, right? In a neutral or procedural sense, it names certain rules, ways of doing things, structured principles. That rule can be held to account against the very norms it claims for itself. And Jabavu seems not to be asking his readers to learn how the colonial bureaucracy works, but to grasp the colonial state as a system of umthetho with its own internal logic, a logic that can be tested, that can be contested, and held to its own claims. And the second verb that he uses is xoxa, to deliberate, to argue out. Argue out, to deliberate, to debate, and many more, which carries specific resonance in its Xhosa political vocabulary. And it is the kind of reasoned exchange that took place at Inkundla, the assembly of Abantu, where they would gather. Those Abantu abadala pronouncing judgments and reach decisions through formal speech, xoxa. So Jabavu in this article is not just coining a modern political vocabulary out of nothing. He seems to be transposing an already existing one, the skills of deliberation that once belonged to abantu abadala abaziyo bekhula bexoxa. He is arguing that this argument must be exercised in print in these newspapers. They must be appropriated by people to make these arguments, to xoxa ephepheni, by those that he was speaking to. Sayishiya le concept yokugqibela ndiye kugqobha and then I'll close. So then the following month, in 1880, another contemporary of Jabavu, William Wellington Gqoba, he responds. And he takes Jabavu's call and gives it a concrete content by going at one specific law. Lo mthetho uthi ngumthetho wemali wezindlu, the hard tax of 1878. Athi ke xa exoxa, khawukhangele uhlobo owasifikela ngalo ngokunyebezela, kanti sisinyanya sesimakade, namhlolokazi ungenantoni naxhekwazana, nokuba linjani sabona sekuthe nyile lo mthetho ngokungenelwa ngamanzi endlini. Look at the way it crept upon us stealthily, yet it is isinyanya sesimakade kwazi kuqulela, an everlasting affliction from which one is exempted, not the widows who had nothing, not the old men, however frail. We only foresaw when this law had already spread, njengokungenelwa ngamanzi endlini, like water flooding into a house. Hear what is happening to the word umthetho across these two paragraphs. Sisinyanya. It names a curse and ontological affliction. To call a colonial statute isinyanya sesmakade. Gopa seems to be refusing to treat umthetho as an ordinary law. It is to say umthetho has betrayed what umthetho is supposed to do. And here the etymology is important. The root of umthetho is thetha, to speak. Umthetho in the Xhosa political vocabulary is not separate from an act of pronouncing something. To make umthetho requires a speaker. It requires a site and a community that recognizes that speech as binding. It belongs in the same conceptual neighborhood as inkundla, an assembly where the speech happens, the recognized speakers. The hard text, by Goba's account, is the opposite of that. It crept in stealthily. It was devised elsewhere. It became visible only when the flood had already entered the house. The closing image, njekungenelwa ngamanzi endlini, like water flooding into the house, is doing a serious conceptual work. And indlu, in Xhosa political vocabulary, is not just a building. It's a unit of social and political life. To say that this umthetho has flooded indlu is to say that the colonial state has violated the most intimate side of African political organization through an instrument it calls itself law. This is what a debate about umthetho looks like when we read isiXhosa. Inside, rather than mind for facts in translation, Jabavu calls for engagement with colonial state on its own claimed principle, and Gopa demonstrates in the following manner what the engagement yields when those principles are tested. A colonial umthetho that has failed the very standard the word itself encodes. These two writers, two issues, one concept worked through in print to its political conclusion. None of it is folklore. None of it is ethnographic color. And I argue here it is political theory, written in isiXhosa in 1880 by African intellectuals. So I could have made my argument about a different recorded account, whether it's an account that was orally recorded in 1838, Gciniswanoi with a missionary, or the collection that William Kekalekai did in 1850s, where he transcribed these collections, interviewed elders for Sir George Grey, or these newspaper accounts, or the novel or so-called novel by S.K. Mqhayi, published by Lovedale Press. The point is to demonstrate that there's just a lot of work of theorizing that is happening in these different platforms. So how do we begin to think through these sources, through these concepts they use, and begin to think deeply in terms of what they were thinking about at the time? And for me, that is the most urgent work that needs to be done. It's not just a work of African languages. It's work that political theorists should be doing, that philosophers should be doing, that people who are in historical studies should be doing. And it is unavoidable that they have to know African languages, have to be invested in knowing these languages. And in that way, we can start not to insert them into the university, but to contest the epistemologies and how they can not only find a space to coexist with other multiple epistemologies, but really to show and contest the space, as it were. Diabulela.
Thank you so much, Sanele. You reminded me that translation is not enough, right? So I work also with museum and heritage parts, right? And we've been arguing repatriation is also not enough. It's not enough to claim something. We have to understand what we're gonna do with it when we reclaim it. And I believe that your work precisely does that. Representation is important for future generations to see that African language is us. It's not people far away. You get what I mean? So thank you for that, Budwa. Can we please give him a round of applause again? Can I have comments, questions, reflections as we close? Dr. Gobe, I see you. Any other? There's only one. Oh, okay. Sis Wang, you go next. And then going once, going twice, okay. So, yeah, take him and then Utlakwal. All right, can you have that?
For me also that refers to this kind of, he's tracing this thing, not just a thing, but just an identity of someone, because sisi nyanya somewhere else. This thing ingene apha endlini, you know, ungathi ungenelwe ngumshologu. In fact, that's the word maybe we'll use, because isinyanya singeso sakho ngumshologu lowo uzokubulala endlini, because you can't enter ubuhlanti babanye abantu ungenguwalumzi. So, I mean, it's deep, because we say in black theology, when we talk about it in black theology, that what our ancestors and what we are dealing with is, when you study theology and systematic theology, they give you the attributes of God. And what we have realized, those attributes of God actually were the attributes of whiteness: omnipotent, omni-knowledgeable, omnipresent, omniscience. I mean, I remember when we used to have Abantu, we used to say, Abantu Book Festival, we don't want white people there because they are already present without being present. Because the language of that we have to use. But also, as I'm just thinking also what you're talking about, I've been thinking about it in Dogba, even in Alengaki Sinayo Ngoku Malunga Nekawa, you know, Ubukawa. I'm sure our ancestors have already dealt with that. Kaza tatwa ezincwadi zayofihlwa ukuthi ba singayazi into okuba eku-experiencing kwabo i-Christianity, what did they arrive at? Now siphinda nathi siqale ekuqaleni ngoku, you know, uku-reviewer the Christianity. Nazi i-dictionary ngapha Edinburgh, we don't have access to them. So we really, I think, I'm convinced we really need to spend time in the archive. But lastly, how do we deal with the fact that zonke izipiki ezithethe up, ndirealize into yoba ndizalana nazo zonke? And now the true saying, Bati, if you look at most of the indigenous clan names in South Africa, whether you are Sotho, you are Tswana, you look at the history, these were noble people. These were from royal, they were noble houses. The poor die in the wars. Then what remains today, it's the elites, or what you can call elites equivalent of that time. But it's the noble houses that have land, that have all these things, but the poor died in the war. So how do you also deal, you know, also looking at the present context in which we are in, the fact that possibility why sizalana sonke is that abanye abantu ababekhona babhubha bebhubhela thina. Thank you.
I also wanted to touch on Isnyanya Simakade, because I felt like that was such a, and I mean the fact that you didn't translate it, and it felt like it was also it was also a powerful thing to not translate it, because it's in Zulu, and and to position, like as in I'm in awe of the complexity of this argument. I think is what I'm trying to get at, and I'm thinking. I'm also thinking around the ways in which storytelling becomes relegated to something aesthetic, and not as a carrier of true knowledge. And so I hear the ways in which you have also kind of spoken about some of the poetry as knowledge and also as work that does intellectual work and that gives us a framework. I'm also thinking about the fact that andithi unsikane kuthiwa watsho uba kuzawufika abantu bephethe ibhotile eqhosha nencwadi imilomo mbomvu. Ze ningayithathi ibhotile, ze ningayiseli ibhotile nilahle iqhosha. But anyway, I come to all of this because that particular premonition was then turned to justify the church and the moving towards the church. And I think about how indigenous languages are sometimes, because of the written kind of advancements being used primarily through the missionaries and being a language of either learning or of conversion. And then I think about the work of some people like Umthunzikazi Mbungwana, who writes erotic queer poetry, and how that was then discarded, like as within the university, where it was work of incredible quality, but was not allowed to be given a distinction because it was not going to be able to be taught in schools. So I don't know if I have a question more than detect. I'm speaking alongside you.
I don't have a question, but I do have a compliment. And this comes at a very critical point of my life. Why I'm saying that, I thought I was crazy when I started going through like the historical texts about the 1880s. So when you are talking about Jabavu, I know him perfectly well. How? So I am a scholar of Solplak. Ne? So now, when I was looking through Solplak, I found Jabavu. To give context to those who don't know Jabavu, Jabavu is the Solplaki of the Xhosa people in our Setswana. So he's one of those that started news reporting, court interpreting, translation, creative writing, linguistics, and literature. For me, here's my argument. I don't think these people were preserving our languages, no? I think they were showing white people that our languages are equivalent to their European languages. So that's another point that we need to look at, because most of the people, they'll be saying that these people were preserving our languages. But then at 1880, who will be thinking, and even if you can look at their writing styles back then, how they were writing, even studying novels and writing newsletters and whatnot. These are the things that came with white people, but they beat them at their own game. And they did it so well with such metaphor that even if when you read the books that are published now, the metaphor that was used by them then, it has perished. Theirs were so perfect to a point that even if they would have sublines in between their writings, that even if when you are a Tswana person or you are a Xhosa person, when you are reading an article, you know that, okay, this is spiritual, this is a political war, this is something that we need to take action now. And we need to take action when it comes to our culture, our languages and whatnot. So my thing is, now I understand I'm not crazy. But I want to say, now it proves my point that these people were not preserving our languages, but then they were just showing people that, what do you think, if you think you are smart, you are 10 times smarter.
No, I think busy comments. So ndiyabulela. But if there's one thing I just want to add to the conversation is recently we, myself and my colleagues have been doing research on Jabavu's paper, Imvo Zabansundu. So Imvo Zabansundu is published, first published in 1888. And just going through and reading, sitting and just reading a newspaper, yango 1888, fumana indaba zangokuya. One of the very interesting things on the conversations that are happening between what's happening in the Eastern Cape, they will publish something, publish a Kgorong Batswana. So there's also like cross publications, which is very interesting that the conversation that was happening in these newspapers were not just parochial Eastern Cape issues. They were national and international issues. They were reading about wars. They were commenting about wars that are happening overseas. There were constant reports about a war that is happening in Russia, PPP. So these guys were constantly reading and they were referencing each other, knew each other. So there's also like a very important point to be made about how international these guys were moving, and also how these ideas were not only circulating Kupepele one, you would see it's one, Kupepele Xhosa. And actually beyond just African languages, they would even use Latin and Xhosa. And something, it's like almost cannot even conceive of that, but they would actually use Latin, and they were rich. I think that rich places that document Black life. I think we can have Black studies on just reading the newspapers of the 19th century, just the newspapers alone. And we could have like a center of Black studies that study different things, theology, issues of theology. Kukho mama bafuna abantwana babo bebebhala kwimvo. Kukho abantu abadutyulwe, kuthiwa amadoda abahlanu adutyulwe in like short bulletin. So there were short forms as well. There's also different forms played there. You get so shocked of like the documentation of Black life. So I think one needs to really take seriously of what one can do creatively around these rich repositories, which are deep archives that are untapped, still untapped. And the space for a lot of people to ask different questions.
Thank you so much, Sanel. We are happy. Sit. Yeah. I'm going to just call Prof to stage, the last one. But thank you so much, Puti. There is a lot to be done, meaning we have to reimagine ourselves. We don't have to do things the way they have been done, right? Because that's why sometimes as Pumeleli, because we are stuck in boxes. So, yeah.
Sanele, you. It is so beautiful to hear such depth, such insights. We heard the depth of our languages through your words and your rendering, but we also heard theology, we heard politics, we heard philosophy, and we also heard law. Immediately, I'm thinking about the Roman Dutch law that we use, and the violence that is in that. And how even in courts, when we translate and interpret, and the violence also that happens in terms of how that happens. I think of Ulerato's work on the TRC, and that violence also, the interpretations and the translations. So mine is to really just thank you. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the offering. Thank you for reinterpreting what theorizing is and what it can and should look like. Yo, I sabulela, but I sabulela.
Okay, so we are towards the end. I'm gonna call one of our elders, Prof. Siasanga Jali, who is the director at the School of Art, and he will give us just a short respondent in terms of towards African languages action frame here at home. Please give him a warm welcome.
Dumelang colleagues. Last year, and I think that we understand that part of this conversation took place last year. Now, so she walks up to the stage, makes a few disclosures, including the fact that she's got a bit of a flu. And so she does not normally speak that way. She does not normally use her nose to speak. And so I would like to make a similar disclosure. Of course, let me, as a matter of protocol, recognize Professor Sikhalo, who is a member of council of this university and the chairholder. The College Management Committee, and I see that one of the members of the College Management Committee just stepped in, Professor Onyansha. The important panelists who took part in this conversation, as well as all of the important people in the room. Colleagues would recall, and I think that this point, I think she's like me. And I think that this point has been made, that this conversation or symposium builds from the intellectual inputs that were made by the retired Ambassador Thenjiwe Mtintso. Of course, the request was for universities to reflect on questions of language practice in our spaces, identity and epistemic justice, policy, curriculum change, institutional transformation, as well as technology, AI, among some of the themes that she touched on. And she asked an important question as to what are universities doing in terms of these important themes that she's raising. In other words, and I think that these are issues that have been raised in the prior talks, how are universities grappling with concepts like igugu lingaba likhulu, umbombo uyaqhosha, ukuthwasa, umvandedwa, ukukhatshwa, impelesi, which I think that colleagues would know how these two actually work together. Umbilini, ukugcamagusha, inkomo yenqoma. And how do you mainstream these important subject matters through a university policy? And how does the technology, particularly issues of AI that are unfolding at the moment, respond to this dialogue? How does ubuchawe, ubangumdang, ubangchiwo, ubangumlawo remember us in terms of identity, in terms of history, and how does this find expression in our curriculum? What is the place of MIT, inter and intra, disciplinary approaches in these conversations? to practices, as an example, like ukunxiba isiphandla, have to collide with workplace rules in Africa, and what is the place of a university in those conversations. And so as a college, we continue to grapple with how institutions respond to these issues and how they institutionalize African languages in South Africa. I'll make a minor point later on, around the concept of African languages and how it is becoming a challenge in our context. More importantly, we also grapple with how a proper and practical action framework look like when it comes to this. And so as you would have seen from the program, I was requested to try and respond, but also speak in terms of the practical framework. As a School of Arts, and I'm trying to contextualize our role at the University of South Africa, we are the custodians of languages. We continue to offer about 10 of the 11 official languages. And some of you would know that within the continent, Unisa is the only university that teaches and undertakes research in all of the official languages of the state. We are increasingly working on bringing in sign language as well. And there's quite a number of projects in the university between our college and the College of Education when it comes to the sign language. But at the moment, and as we speak, we continue to offer 10 of the 11 official languages, and this is done across the board. Whether one is doing research, whether one is doing teaching and learning, whether one is looking at signage, and the many other ways of making sure that African languages are institutionalized within the university. Of course, these official languages coexist and are offered along our modern languages, including Mandarin, Italian, Russian, French, and Portuguese. These modern languages are housed in the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages, and it's one of the key departments. Now, I think I'm also as fragmented as you are. I'll try to go back and make the point that I was trying to make around the challenge of the nomenclature African languages or African language department in our own space. So at Unisa, we have about 4 language departments: linguistic and modern languages, Afrikaans and the theory of literature, English. And then we have something, and you'll excuse me in terms of how I'm phrasing it, something awkwardly called African languages. In one instance, you've got Afrikaans, you've got English, you've got African languages, which is, of course, the challenge for us because it hides the 9 languages that are offered in that department. So a few years ago, we started a project with the then Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Motsematikane. Her concern was around prestige in terms of these languages. And she said that, but we can't allow this to continue because history will judge us very harshly if we are people who know that these are national and international languages, yet we continue to subsume them under the broader name that is called African languages. That is a project that is ongoing because we did something across the entire country and tried to look at the naming conventions, some of these departments across of the universities in the country. So you'd go to Fort Hare, for instance, you'd have a Department of isiXhosa as an example. you'd go to Northwest, and then you'd have Department Isitswana. However, the challenge for us is the reach of our university and the dynamics around that. Unisa is set up in such a way that it becomes a national university in the sense that it's got campuses across the whole country. Whereas you then have regional universities, Rhodes is an example, where you could easily have an isiXhosa department, and it could be justified as to the naming convention of that department. I must say that as part of our response to institutionalize languages in the university, what we are trying to do, we are trying to develop a school of arts. So the College of Human Sciences has about 55,000 students, at least that is the projection for next year. And Kachingana I can see his reaction, because that is probably more or less the size of his university in Cape Town. That is the size of a faculty in our own context. And in terms of that faculty, if you then drill it down to schools, and currently languages are under the School of Arts, and the School of Arts accounts for about 70% of the students, which is then a single school. Someone would assist me with a percentage of 70% in terms of 355,000 students. So the most practical ways in which we are doing this then is to develop a school of languages. So likely in the future we're going to have a School of Arts, which will be three departments: communication sciences, information sciences, and art and music. Then you're going to have 4 language departments that form the School of Languages. That is one of the ways in which we are responding to this issue, and I know that I've got 10 minutes, so I'll try and run through these ones that I was trying to speak to as well. So I spoke to, in terms of Unisa context in the national and the international issue. To also try and address the issue of languages, Unisa in 2023 approved an official university policy. Official university policy dictates that all of the official languages in the university, a student may either be taught, be supervised, an academic may do research in all of the official languages. It's an official policy that is there in place. One of the ways in which we are trying to support that policy is at institutional and at college level. And so we have what we call the DHET language project, and I think that all of the university have it. I just forget the name of the professor in your, she's the chairperson of Pencil. Yes, she's running that project. So at Unisa, it's currently being overseen by myself. And it's a language policy framework for all public universities. And what we are trying to do, that we are trying to institutionalize African languages through various means. In terms of the policy, which needs to be followed by the university budget. Because you can have a great policy, however, if the budget does not follow it, then you have a great, almost that thing that they say about South Africa, that South Africa has got great policies. However, we are not operationalizing them. Now, the policy is brilliant. However, we need a budget that responds to that. I've spoken about the issue of parity of esteem in terms of the different languages that are in the African Languages Department. Of course, there's many other praxis and language-related projects that are happening in the university. We've got a glossary project that is across the institution, where each and every module has to have glossaries across all of the languages. And it is the responsibility of academics in that module to look at the key terms and then judge whether they should go, these should go to the glossary or not. And we continue to collaborate with the library on that, because all of the glossaries that have been done, they are currently on the university's library page. M&D abstract university policy is that all of the master's and doctoral theses should be available in at least 3 official languages. And it is the choice of the student who then decide that these are their preferred language. So if someone is supervised in isiXhosa, an example, right? Then working with the supervisor, the student may choose English as one of the languages that their abstract should be available on, and then another language of their choice. Again, it's one of the ways that we are institutionalizing this. Translanguaging, we are currently experimenting with modules that are offered in quite a number of languages in the same module. So you'll find that, as an example, in the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages, we have a module that is offered in 3 languages in the same module. It's offered in Setswana, it's offered in English, and it's offered in isiZulu. Of course, the decision in terms of language preference, it is the decision of academics in the module itself. But the requirement from our own side is that at least we should be implementing the policy of the university when it comes to this thing. Curriculum transformation framework is something that we developed a few years ago. You would know that Unisa has got the longest decoloniality summer school in the country. And as part of what arose from those conversations about the decoloniality summer school was around the question of then, how do we change the curriculum? And we then responded to that through a curriculum transformation framework, which has got about 7 principles, and language and accountability is one of the issues that are raised in that framework. The latest project that I should probably speak about, I'm towards the end. The latest projects that I should speak about, I think, are 2 important projects that we have recently, 3 important projects that we have recently done. And I see there are colleagues in the room in relation to that. We've got a children's literature competition in the university that is managed in the School of Arts and by the language departments in the School of Arts. And so what we're then trying to do, we're trying to respond to the concerns that have been raised around reading and writing culture in South Africa. We know that the next generation of people who are going to be at this university probably at the moment are in grade R. And so how then do you make sure that you build a pipeline that will start from grade R to first year at Unisa? You do that by intervening at that level. And so we then try to do that through the children's literature competition, where academics, they write short stories in all of the multiple languages of the university. That is one. The second one that we did was a partnership with Sadila and Wikipedia. And we were concerned that there were South African languages that were not popular online, right? And we then try to do something about that with Sadila and Wikipedia. And lastly, something that I would like to announce, in September, Unisa is launching the African Language International Film Festival. And thank you. We recognize that there's international, film festival like your Canes. There's film festival in the country, your DIF, which is your Durban International Film Festival, and the Joburg one. However, our view is that African languages should find expression in quite a number of ways. So our criteria when we select submissions in terms of that festival it's African languages. Films that do not conform to that criteria, I mean, we've got other criteria, whether it's a documentary and so forth, but the core thing that is related to the name of the festival is the question of it being African languages. So, colleagues, those are some of the ways in which we're trying to respond to the issues that have been raised. A few other ones like your Spelling Bee, which is the Spelling Bee project in the country. Last year, we had about 700 learners who were in our university and participating in the Spelling Bee competition. So yes, Professor Sekgalo, that is some of the work that we are doing. Next time you see the ambassador, maybe just you can engage her on the practical issues. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jale. It's lovely to know what management is doing. Bagetsu, we have come to an end. Thank you so much. I'd like to really give a big thanks to our speakers. You guys have been really insightful in how we can really do this thing. I come out of here more inspired. I know Mama Tencho will be happy about the work we do. I'd like to thank you, Prof. Sekgalo. I'd like to thank our colleagues for putting this event together. And I'd like to thank you guys, our guests, for coming through and taking your whole morning. Right. And there's nothing more I can say but thank you. And I hope it doesn't end here, that we hold ourselves accountable in our own little sections. The work is a lot. The erasure was a lot, so is the work gonna have to be 2 times. So, fela yalo bagetso, ke leboga go menagane. Ma? Ke leboga go menagane. And Prof is reminding me that lunch is served outside and the conversation can still go on. We have a college event tomorrow. So guys, especially the students, please come to this kind of things, right? This is where you have access to your lectures, you have access to researchers, you have access to open up your mind. And I'm really excited about how many students are here today. So for the whole of Research Week, this is how you do learning, by engaging in this type of things. Sanele, right? We had to start somewhere. That's where we started. It's not just about the writing, it's about the engagement also. So sis, you can tell them about the event.
Ke a leboga, dumelang. Tomorrow we are continuing with our Research and Innovation Week. So we are having the main event, the college one, at the Senate Hall, starting at 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock. So I'm requesting you humbly to come and attend the event tomorrow. That's the announcement that I wanted to make, colleagues. I'm looking forward to see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Lunch is served, and thank you so much as the chair.